Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to MBR, or as we like to call it around here, Nothing But Rants, the show where I find topics that I'm oddly passionate about and I pontificate upon them. These are not hot takes, but rather takes that I'm hot about. What's up? You really like that?
Let's shut up and grind some tape.
What's going on, everybody? Brooks told you yesterday that there's a chance that he's a little late to the show. What he didn't tell you is he's probably not going to make it in at all today. There were some unfortunate circumstances that went down, so he opted up changing the schedule as to where he was traveling. So he's at, Alpharetta High School right now?
He is.
So he's not going to be in here tonight, so it is just me and Jay Will, but we've still got a loaded show for you as always. Go ahead and while you're here, I'll just go and tell you, hit the like button, subscribe if you're not doing that already. Make sure you're putting in comments, things such as that. Trick the algorithm into making this better. So what do you want to start with first off, NCAA pay for play?
Yeah, let's go ahead and dive into that. I think that's the biggest topic that's come into college football as of today. That was some pretty big news that hit the timeline this morning.
So yeah, it looks like the NCAA is rapidly going towards a model where players are now paid to be played, which is, of course, kind of what NIL is already. The NCAA is doing in the House, they're also dealing with a House lawsuit against the NCAA that's going to go into antitrust laws for 2025. So it's basically the NCAA kickstarting into gear, trying to get this revenue split going down.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing for college sports. I mean, this is kind of what it feels like everything has been working up towards, with the NCAA working towards being basically irrelevant now. It's going to disperse eventually, and that's what this is. I mean, there was literally a quote in this article that said the NCAA will die out from this. Like, this is what is going to cause the NCAA to be finished and no longer exist. So I think the biggest thing is that it's going to create this level of playing field. It's essentially like kind of what NIL was envisioned, what it was supposed to be, of like every player gets like a cut of what they deserve. Everybody is kind of like, there's no longer these high-speed chasers, and then also like a group behind them, and then everybody else just trying to figure out what the heck is going on, figure out how they can make this work for themselves. It is now just going to be like, all right, here you go. Like, here's the revenue splits. Like, this is what you earn from this TV contract and whatnot, and this is how we're going to disperse it amongst everybody.
Yeah, according to this article written by CBS, this is something that's been floated out in February, and the SEC and Big Ten have begun talking about this for a while now, so it seems. I feel like this kind of format that the NCAA is going to, and basically admitting that we are eventually just going to phase ourselves out because of the way things are going here, it's kind of a perfect admittance that the NIL era as a whole was a failure. Because you had all this time in leading up to 2020 where it was you can't pay to have players on the team, you can't pay them for their name, image, and likeness. And then finally, NCAA finally threw their hands up and said, screw it, open the floodgates. And you've essentially led to this mess. I mean, the way the sport has changed in the last 4 years has been more rapid than it's ever changed. I mean, you think about it, we've gotten expansions because of this. We have obviously player revenue. There's tampering at levels that you've never seen before. And I think you can all tie it back to the NIL method, because now teams, instead of having to do under the table shady things with paying players in the past, it was much more out in the open now, where you can basically say, hey, yeah, this is what a player's making. This is a player's salary, quote unquote, to play for a team. And you get around it just by your NIL loophole, to the point where now the NCAA's basically had to step in and say, okay, we're going to do revenue splits.
Yeah, and I think what fans are necessarily looking forward to the most about this, or I should say myself, is that everything's a little more upfront now. Like, there's no longer this unknown number that's floating around of like, Georgia's trying to get to this number, Ohio State's playing at this number, they're trying to raise X amount of dollars to provide for their roster. It's now, like I said, like, we know how much TV brings in for these conferences and whatnot. Like, we have access to those types of things, and those types of information is shared with us. And so you'll know like a dollar amount, or you'll get like a rough estimate at least of like what's going on, how it's being dispersed amongst these athletes and these programs, and what all is going on. Because that's been one of the crazier things about NIL, is that you just don't really know anything. Like, you don't know what to trust. You don't know what to believe. You don't know if it's like dollar amounts are true or whatnot. Like, you don't know if this deal coming out, like, oh, this player apparently is getting $3 million or whatever to come back to his school. Like, you're still going to get those things, but it's going to be like, this player got an NIL deal, and then they're also getting this from this revenue split and especially for the biggest thing too, is that it helps out all the other sports. Like, this isn't just for college football. This isn't just for the sake of college football. It is for the biggest seller, and it is because it's the biggest money producing aspect of college athletics, but it also helps out just everybody else too.
I think it is going to be interesting to see how this might help or hurt, because obviously there's going to be revenue splits. Obviously there's an X amount of dollars that you can spend on certain things. There's still going to be a disparity in this because Big Ten teams and SEC teams are going to make more than Big 12 teams and ACC teams. But the other thing I think that you have to consider is who's going to enforce this. Like, essentially there are salary caps now for college football teams, and it's basically a percentage of what you make. But who's going to come in and say, hey, you're spending too much over this limit, or hey, you're using external funds from elsewhere, using NIL money to kind of tempt players into coming here? Because you'd have to imagine that the NIL method is still going to be, it's still a thing. Like, NIL is not going away anytime soon. You're never going to lose that. So you're still going to have the opportunity for teams to come in and say, hey, we've got, you know, X amount that we can pay you as salary for playing, and then all of a sudden we can also throw on a little extra something because it's an NIL package. So I wonder if you're actually going to stop the Tennessees, the Ohio States, the teams in the world that are just clearly throwing money left and right to get rosters, if you're going to be able to minimize that.
Yeah, I guess the question then at that point is, like, once this starts happening, how willing are your boosters going to be to continue pouring in? Because that's what it is now. You know, we talk about how boosters are kind of getting exhausted of having continually being asked, like, hey, we need some more money from you. Like, this month, we got to get back up to that number. Like, we need your help. We need your support. So I'm curious to see how this impacts that, like their willingness to keep on pouring money. Because you would have to imagine, like, once this starts rolling in, those dollar amounts are probably going to change. Now, it may not change for everybody. Someone probably, or multiple people, I would assume, are still going to be like, I'll keep giving you a bunch of money. Like, if it's going to help us, like, I have no problem whatsoever. But I think it is going to change, like, some of the willingness, and, like, maybe not go back to how it was beforehand, before NIL existed. But I think it's going to hinder it a little bit for sure. Because, I mean, it has to. Like, if you know that your university is bringing in money now precisely for the fact that their players are going to get paid from that, then you're probably not going to be as willing to, like, you probably don't feel a need anymore to put as much bearing on your shoulders to help support this roster.
I mean, I think you might have to honestly consider how this is going to financially hurt a lot of college football teams, because essentially all of your rosters money, all the money you're spending on rosters right now is coming from boosters. It's coming from, hey, we need X amount for this 5-star wide receiver. We need X amount because our starting quarterback's trying to transfer elsewhere. And boosters are willing to pay that because it's, you know, it's for the sanctity of the team. Whereas now if you go into this updated system where it's, hey, we're automatically, anything we make, 13% of that's going to this roster. Boosters, I feel like, are going to be much less inclined to shill out money and say, wait a minute, why do I still need to give you $100,000 a year when you're spending this much money on it?
Yeah.
Is Brooks joining us?
Yeah, I think we have our boy Brooks on here now with us.
Can you hear him?
We cannot hear him for some reason. This might be a problem for us.
Brooks, give me 1 second. Jay was working on the getting you. He's shaking his head.
Volume is on. Uh-oh. This isn't. Oh, wait, hold on. Collab cam is unmuted. Let's see. How about now? No.
Still muted.
What the heck?
He's waving goodbye.
Boo.
Well, that was Brooks. He's at Alpharetta High School right now.
Well, that was a bit of a failure, probably on my part. Probably should have checked the audio first beforehand before we had him join. I'm not sure what's going on there because everything looked to be good on my part. Let's see. All right, he's back in here now. Let's see if that'll work for us this time. 1 second. He's talking to me on the screen right now, but I cannot hear him. I don't know.
That's tough.
That is tough. All right, that's fine though. We'll keep on rolling through this. That's unfortunate though. We're excited to have Brooks live on the trail. Again, he is at Alpharetta High School, putting in work for us, putting in work for himself and a lot of these kids in the state. So glad he's being able to put his part into that and also helping all these high school programs get exposure to these kids. So he's out there doing work. Don't think he just took the night off from us and left the work all on our shoulders. He's certainly putting in work for himself as well and everybody else. But yeah, going back to this revenue share, I can't remember what exactly you were going off of before we hopped into that, but
basically I feel like this might financially hurt teams more because boosters are already fed up, sick and tired of this. So if you're a booster for, say, the University of Ohio State right now and you see this revenue split coming down the pipe, you can say, oh, thank God, finally my money's not going to be coming to spend on players. Finally, I don't have to spend money. The universities are going to do that. I'll still donate and whatnot. So if the university has this X amount of money that they're splitting, there's nothing really stopping them from going and using NIL packages to sweeten it. But I think that boosters are going to, in turn, say, wait a minute, you have X amount of dollars of your money already going to this. Why do you need more from me? Why do I have to keep shilling out money? So I think that it's going to affect the way teams recruit necessarily. I don't know if it's going to stop tampering and things from happening again. I don't know how it's going to be enforced.
Yeah, I don't think those types of things are going to stop just because... I mean, you'll still have money floating around. Like the money that, I mean, this was happening prior to even NIL being a thing, not on this type of grand scheme of things, of course, but like, I mean, those types of things were happening. Programs were not playing clean before NIL rolled around. So I don't think any of that type of stuff stops, but at the very least, I think it might hinder some of these types of things, and it might, I don't know, like players knowing that they are going to already have this money rolling in for themselves. I think it might at least, maybe it creates some more stability for them to where they feel like that, you know, they don't have to go bag chasing the transfer portal. Like maybe it stops some of that. Maybe it stops some of the momentum of like an onslaught of players entering the portal once the season ends in the winter window and things like that, because there's not any more of this like, oh, I can go get 2 times the more money at this program. Like they're telling me this again. I think it might level that out some more, but where it does kind of affect, is, you know, if we continue to have these Power 4 conferences, is then you might get a bunch of ACC players, or you might get a bunch of Big 12 players saying, well, I'm going to try and go get my way on the SEC roster or the Big 10 rosters if I can go get a chunk of that money amount, because they're bringing in more bread than we are from this revenue split.
Yeah, I mean, you look at another butterfly effect of this, it's going to be whenever this becomes an effect and we get the pay-for-play system, I think shortly after that, you're going to see the fall of the Big 12 and the ACC, teams that aren't necessarily making the revenue splits that the Big 10 and SEC are, simply because, one, if I'm a high talented player, why would I want to go somewhere where my revenue split is automatically less? Mm-hmm. And is those schools that are having lesser revenue going to be more strained to do NIL things such as that to catch up package wise? So I think that you're eventually going to see the talent and the level of play style kind of like a Pac-12 situation where the revenue split's not going to be enough to match the talent on the field, to where I think you're eventually, this is going to be this is the first step, in my opinion, to the ACC and the Big 12 collapsing.
So how do you think this NIL era, like once it officially goes away, like how do you think it's going to be remembered by college football fans? Because I think that we all are capable and we all are fall guilty to romanticizing certain things. When like once we're 4 years removed from this, it might be like, man, I love the days where everybody got to create their own playing field and everybody kind of got to do this in their own way, and they got to be a little more creative with it. Like they weren't just tied down to this. Like, do you think it's going to be remembered of like, well, the initial revealing of NIL was a complete failure, or do you think it's going to be like, man, I miss the old days, I miss the way NIL used to be?
I think that NIL was, first of all, something that should have happened a long time ago and was absolutely necessary. College football players, the revenue that they bring in for schools and teams and logos and all those things, for them not to see an ounce of that was ridiculous. I think it was a massive failure in the way the NCAA rolled this out, because then it was essentially the Wild West, to where it got to the point, I mean, we're at the point now where teams are doing everything they can to make more money. And it was always going to be that way, but there was such a more emphasis on, hey, we need to do whatever we can to make sure we're bringing in as much cash as possible, because roster payments are expensive now. I mean, Ryan Day famously said, it's costing me $13 million to have a roster. Like, that $13 million has to come from somewhere. Well, let's look at a place where we can get different revenue splits, different things such as that. I think it's the reason why you have so much conference realignment right now, because teams are constantly looking for, hey, where can we go? We're going to get the best revenue split. I think it's why you have so much tampering now, because you have now teams that can go and say, hey, we have a better NIL package for you under the table. Now, obviously, you were able to do that the whole time, but the fact that, one, the NCAA lost a lawsuit against Tennessee, they've basically become a powerless organization. So there's no enforcement group coming in saying, now, wait a minute, that's tampering. Wait a minute, this is this. So I think that's going to be the way that NIL is looked at, is that it's something that needed to happen, but the way it was rolled out was such a failure that it completely destroyed not destroyed, but changed and altered the fabric of a sport that everyone loves.
Yeah, and I think the biggest takeaway, honestly, that I had from this article, and I think it's worth sharing with the audience, is this is a direct quote from the CBS article written by Dennis Dodd. It says, because it is an antitrust case, this is referencing the House case that we've been talking about multiple times on this show, Because it is an antitrust case, damages sought could be tripled. If the case goes to a jury and the NCAA loses, the association could be on the hook for at least $4.2 billion. And then this is right under it. USA Today quoted a sports economics expert for the plaintiffs who said 7,000 current and former athletes would be entitled to that money.
Good Lord.
So $4.2 billion, and there's 7 athletes, either former college athletes or current college athletes, that would be entitled to that $4.2 billion. So this is where that connection of NCAA is going to lose out on this. This is the death of it because of this $4.2 billion. And then, of course, that being dispersed amongst all of these athletes. So that's the big hooker there. And so just a big piece of news. And I think it seems like this is going to happen quicker rather than sooner, in my opinion. Like as we march into the offseason, you're going to hear more and more about it. And then eventually it's just going to be set into place. And that's going to be the reality of college football now.
Yeah, and I don't know if... I mean, part of me wants to say, yeah, and say you screwed this up. This was a completely avoidable situation. But part of me also, I don't really know. Like, did the NCAA ever have the means to enforce 132 teams, just 132 FBS Division I teams, being able to enforce them from stopping, hey, you're paying too much for this, you're tampering here, you're doing this. I mean, the whole reason NIL fell was because it essentially became the Wild West to the point where everyone's looking around like, someone please do something. Yeah. So I don't know if the NCAA was ever able to stop this, but it's gonna be very interesting to see what sport is in years from now. But I mean, another thing that you have to take into consideration is you're probably going to start seeing player unions and things such as that, just because you are now going to be, quote unquote, employees getting revenue splits. Yeah, and I mean, there's already teams that are ahead of the curve on this. Like UAB, this was an article written last night. UAB became the first ever college football team to join a players association. Every player on their entire roster signed up for athletes.org, which made them the first Division I football team to publicly join a players association. And head coach Trent Dilfer basically said that, this is from the article, Trent Dilfer gathered his team for a voluntary meeting mid-April to encourage them to prepare for the future when the college athletes might be able to negotiate for a larger share of the sport's revenue. Quote, they're going to have a seat at the table, said Dilfer. I want to make sure I helped pour gasoline on something that's going to happen no matter what. I might as well use my influence to help it happen faster and half on our players. So essentially what UAB and Trent Dilfer did here is he saw the writing on the wall where we're going to get to pay for play eventually. Like this is something that's coming within the next few years. It might happen during your collegiate career. So go ahead and get something for a union, to join an organization, join something to where you can leverage saying, hey, wait a minute, we want X amount from the school for revenue splits.
I think this is really cool because it's UAB. It's not one of these higher profile college football programs within the SEC or the Big Ten or even any other of the other Power 4 conferences. I think it's great that Trent Dilfer is doing something for his athletes and because this is another question I think doesn't really get talked about enough is like when this Super League happens, like not only do some other college football teams, not only are they going to get screwed over, like what happens to programs, like Stanford potentially or some of these other football programs, like are they going to get cut loose from this type of deal? But also these smaller programs, these group of 5 schools like UAB, who rely on these like out-of-conference games with the University of Georgia or Alabama or whoever they play to really fund their programs. And, the more people that you add to your conference and the more conference games, we're already getting to that point where like Greg Sankey and the commissioners of the conferences are already adding more conference games, and that dwindles down the amount of out-of-conference games you can play on these quote-unquote cupcake games. So I think it's great that he's finding stability for his players because there's uncertainty for every college football program right now, but there's a whole lot more uncertainty for programs like that. And
it should be known that the team currently has no plans to bargain with the school at this point. Like there is no revenue split to be had. There is no way you can leverage, but it is a sign and it is kind of a symbol of growth for the sport, for players kind of saying, hey, we have this ability to unionize. We can come together and collectively bargain against certain things and for certain benefits, similar to how the NFLPA does. NFLPA obviously doesn't have to represent 132 teams. So I think it's going to be interesting to see, are you just going to get this amalgamation of a bunch of different teams represented by a bunch of different groups that then fight for certain things and have different rights? And I mean, I feel like that's going to eventually get to be a head case. So does it something that eventually maybe we see by conference where the SEC has their own association, the Big Ten has their own association, or hell, I mean, we might even get to a day where we're at a super conference that has an association. So
yeah, and I think if it gets to a super conference, then that becomes a whole lot easier. Then it's just like you have all of these players amongst the conference, and it's kind of like how professional sports work in a sense of we have people who are like who represent us. Like, we have head guys amongst this players association that we have. They're the ones that are helping us out, and they're the ones leading the pledge for us. And then that just kind of rotates based on who's in college football right now and who isn't and whatnot. And then again, if it's a super conference between two conferences like the SEC and the Big Ten, then that's a whole lot easier to manage. But if it remains at 4, which I don't think it will for too much longer, then it is a little more difficult. I think you would probably have to go to maybe by conference, and then like maybe you have, I don't know, like 5 representatives from each conference, and then all the 5 of those players meet up with the other 5 in the other conferences or whatnot. I don't know how that would work or whatnot, but that's another interesting point that you bring up.
It is props to Trent Dilfer for being able to unionize and kind of bring your team together and show like, hey, I'm here for your support. 'Cause, I mean, it benefits him in no way to have a player union, basically. Now, obviously, there's no negative effects to it right now because you're not having to play revenue splits. You're paying them out of pocket from your boosters, but it is interesting. Do you want to go to this Deion Sanders news? Because I think it's time for our weekly or daily update on what Deion Sanders is doing at Colorado. I feel like for the last 3 weeks, we've done nothing but talk about him, but he just keeps making his way back into the news. Today it was not an altercation, but a back and forth that Xavier Smith had on Twitter where basically he called him out, called Coach Sanders out. Do you want to give the layout of this?
Oh, yeah. This was really interesting. Before we do that, though, I don't think we've welcomed you guys in. I don't think we've done a proper welcoming in. So welcome in, guys. If you're in here right now, you probably notice like this feels a whole lot different than the other times that I turn into the Film Guy Network. And it should, because it is just me and my boy Christian. There is no Brooks right now. He's on the trail again at Alpharetta High School right now, putting in that work for high school kids and for our website and all that good stuff. So he is not in studio because he is working elsewhere. Me and Christian are holding down the fort. So do all that good stuff for us, though. Like, subscribe, rate, review on the podcast platforms if you're listening over there. Keep on commenting in the comments section. We love seeing you guys being interactive in there. It helps us a whole lot. So again, like, subscribe, rate, review. And then also, while we're doing this, welcoming you guys into the show, we want to give a quick shout out to our friends over at Prize Picks. NBA basketball still going on. You want to get those plays right now. Taco Tuesday is happening right now. Usually by the time the show starts, it's probably a little too late to dive in on some of those Taco Tuesday picks, but you probably could get some of those West Coast games and the NBA playoffs and get some plays on those. You got some great deals going on right now. And if you use promo code Brooks today as a first-time user, you get a 100% deposit match. You put $100 in, you get $100 back. So some great deals going on over there. Promo code Brooks over at Prize Picks. So yeah, now we can get on to this Deion Sanders stuff.
You've got that Prize Picks read down pat, don't you?
I know, and I've only done it like 2 or 3 times since like the beginning of this studio and the show with all 3 of us in there. So I'm pretty impressed myself that I was just able to do that. I was a little rusty. I wasn't sure how it was going to go, but yeah, I got to show the love to the Prize Picks and got to make sure I do it right. So yeah,
for sure.
I appreciate you recognizing that. But yeah, this Deion Sanders and then also Shadeur Sanders, because he wanted to voice his opinion in this a little bit as well. But again, you know, we always say like, it feels like we're always talking Deion, but they're always in the news, and they're in the news for a good reason. And this time it was because of an article that The Athletic wrote about former players that had transferred out of Colorado and kind of voicing about how that process went, their thoughts on Deion when they were during their time at the program. But one of the biggest, I shouldn't say stars, but one of the biggest profiles in this article was Xavier Smith, who's actually a former 3-star recruit out of Langston Hughes High School here in the state of Georgia and was part of the 2022 recruiting class. And just to give you a little background on him, he eventually commits to Colorado about 6 months before Deion Sanders was announced as a head coach. So he was a commit to the Buffaloes before Deion was even there. And then during his senior year of high school, he breaks his leg. And then during spring practice that following year, he breaks his leg again, rehabbing it. So he didn't play at all that his first season at Buffalo, or I should say at Colorado. And then that led him to entering the transfer portal. And then this article, he talks about the process of what it was like to enter the transfer portal and how that type of business went down. And it wasn't a one-on-one meeting with Deion that he did. It was actually him being brought in by the defensive coordinator and another player into this room to talk about entering the transfer portal. And this is the quote that Xavier Smith gave about the situation. He says, "We sat on the sofa and he's talking to us, but he's not even looking at us. I'm looking at Coach Kelly dead in his eyes. Sanders said he felt like I should hit the portal. He didn't want me to waste a year thinking I could earn a spot." He then goes on to say, "I was actually getting mad, like tears coming to my eyes, because bro, you never even tried to get to know me." And then later on in the article, Smith says, he felt like he was a background in a TV reality show during his time at Colorado. So Xavier Smith kind of felt some type of way about how things were handled leading into the transfer portal and him transferring out of Colorado, and obviously feels that it could have been handled better by Coach Sanders.
So this is not a great look for Deion, in my opinion. Now, everyone knows Coach Prime has his way of certain doing things, and Cormani McClain kind of hinted at something similar to this, or maybe expressed his disappointment in a similar way, not as eloquently as this was put there. This seems like he is someone who is genuinely frustrated by the way his head coach treated him, and I think there's even one part where he talks about how Deion Sanders made him question his confidence in himself and made him say, like, didn't do things the right way, and kind of just said that out, like, you should have done this differently, I feel like, which honestly, it's hard to fault a player for that, to say, like, hey, you probably should have done this differently. Now, you go to the Cormani McClain thing where I didn't want to play for clicks. Yeah. Now, Deion had been on record multiple times before saying, like, hey, he's not doing the things that he needs to do, but this is not the same situation. I mean, this is Xavier Smith really kind of letting his emotions out and saying, like, I felt like I was treated poorly here. I felt like Deion Sanders was kind of running a reality show, which he's kind of been accused of doing something similar to that, where it's, it's all for show. So it's not a good look for him. And it's an even worse look for what Shadeur did after this. Yeah,
I'll get to the Shadeur thing in a second. I do want to mention that I think there is some positivity out of this. I think it is good on Deion to, like, be upfront and honest with these kids, saying, like, I do think you should enter the portal because I don't want you just lingering around this roster. We don't want to put false belief in you thinking that you're going to have a spot starting for us this year. I think you should seek opportunity elsewhere. And I believe he's at UTEP right now, so he is on a different roster. But so I think it's good on Deion to do that. But the whole thing of, we're going to bring you in, and then we're also going to bring one of your teammates in who's also contemplating into the transfer portal, along with the defensive coordinator, and then we're going to talk about this decision altogether. I don't think that's the correct way. I think that there's a right and a wrong. Like, I think it should just be a one-on-one conversation with your head coach, or at least a one-on-one conversation with your position coach, the one that you're dealing with the most, the one you're interacting with probably the most on a day-to-day basis. So I think there's a small bit of positivity out of this. Again, being honest, and that's something that we've talked about, of, like, if there is anything about Deion, he is consistent, and I think he is brutally honest, and I continue to say that that's a good thing that we get this brutal honesty from Deion. I think the sport could use some more out of that, but having players continue to say these types of things about your program and continue to say negative things about how situations like this are handled certainly isn't a good look. And then this here from Shadeur certainly is not a good look. I'm going to throw this tweet up on the screen. So Athletic tweets out this article with the quote about Xavier Smith talking about how he had tears in his eyes, how he just really didn't feel like Deion got the chance to really get to know him while he was on the roster. And so the Athletic tweets that, and then Shadeur quote tweets it with this, and he says, I don't even remember him, to be honest. Bro had to be very mid at best.
That's a really bad look. Yeah. Not only because obviously it's a starting quarterback for Colorado, it's not a good look from a team culture standpoint, but from the fact that obviously that's the head coach's son. Now, I understand he's coming to Deion's defense. I understand that he's saying, he's defending his dad as coach, but it's not a good look to basically, the only way you can respond to that and the only way you undermine it is to just say, oh, he sucked anyways. He was mid. He didn't deserve to play here. I just don't. There's definitely a right and wrong way to do things, and I think everyone agrees that Shadeur should not have tweeted that.
No, absolutely not. And it's just one of those things where it probably should have stayed in the drafts. Like, I don't know. I understand he wants to defend probably not only the program, but he somewhat wants to defend his dad as well, which I completely understand that. Like, if someone was talking about my dad like that and I felt like they were in the wrong, I would probably feel some type of need as well to defend my dad. But just kind of keep it to yourself, because, I mean, everybody's paying attention to Colorado. This is one of the things that comes with the territory of when you're just kind of putting everything out there, then everybody's eyes are on you. And they probably feel the same way that a lot of people like you guys in the chat do, of like people putting in circus emojis saying like, this is a circus show out in Colorado. Like, this is the type of thing that it creates. And it kind of creates what happened last year, where you get a bunch of people hate watching you, a bunch of people that want to see you fail because of things like this. Like, there's just a right way to handle things and a wrong way to handle things. And especially for someone like Shadeur, who by all means has the most potential of anybody on that roster to be an NFL draft pick. I mean, we talked about it yesterday.
Yeah, him and Travis Hunter are definitely 1A.
Yeah, absolutely. Travis Hunter as well. But there's talk about Shadeur possibly being the number one overall draft pick next year, or at least the number one quarterback taken off the board next year. And you can say what you want about tweeting things doesn't matter to NFL GMs or whatnot, but I mean, we see time and time again during the pre-draft process where character issues come up time and time again.
I mean, hell, Spencer Rattler just tumbled down boards because of a way he acted when he was 17 years old as a senior in high school. Now, that was an entire reality show that spanned like 6 or 7 30-minute episodes that painted him in a very bad light. But this tweet, I mean, it went viral. You can, even if you delete it, there's going to be NFL GMs, NFL coaches that come back from this to say, wait a minute, this guy might be a locker room concern. Yeah, this guy might be a quote unquote cancer culture just because he's talking down to teammates in this way.
Yeah, I mean, I screenshotted it as immediately when I saw it because I wanted to make sure that I had it for the show, and then also just had it for future reference if we ever need it. So it's always on my phone, so I can always bring it back on the internet. And I think it had like 5,000 plus likes by the time I had gotten to it. So plenty more people, I'm sure, have screenshotted that now. So yeah, once it's out there, it's out there. And again, like, quarterbacks, they always get labeled as a leader, and while they may not always have to be the leader, when you're looking for your future franchise quarterback and someone like Shadeur Sanders, like, these are the types of things that you have to consider, because while it may not be the transfer portal in the NFL, it may not be people leaving your roster because they can't find a spot or whatnot. I mean, there's free agency, and you don't want him talking bad about former players. You don't want him talking bad about anybody on this roster, because if you lose the foundation of that locker room and it starts with your starting quarterback, then you essentially have nothing as a head coach or a GM of an NFL organization. You essentially failed that because of something that wasn't even on the field. It wasn't the on the field product that you drafted. It was everything that had to do with the off the field issues.
Correct. And I think this is where Shadeur is doing himself a disservice. Like, Deion Sanders made a name for himself, acted this way throughout his draft process and things such as that. Let's be honest, because he could. He was a two-sport athlete. He was one of the most gifted prospects ever. Like, there was no denying that he was a top 10 pick. He could have acted however he wanted. He could have been as cocky. He could have been as arrogant as he wanted. I don't think Shadeur has this same advantage. I don't think Shadeur has the same advantage to be able to come and say, oh, we're going to go to these 5 teams and nowhere else. We're not going to be drafted by this, but hey, you know, I'm still going to act this way just because I'm so talented. I don't think Shadeur has that same luxury, and it seems like he's kind of acting that way just simply because, well, he has that luxury now because your dad is the head coach.
So, I mean, like, you know, I wasn't exactly around when Deion played in the NFL or even the MLB, but I would have to imagine this was kind of a very similar way to how Deion behaved as a player. Like, maybe not on this grand scheme because social media was obviously not as prevalent. Like, everything was not out in the open with him and these during his time with college football or anything like that. But I would have to imagine that Shadeur kind of gets these types of things because of his dad and, like, just kind of wanting to stand on 10 toes about himself and his character. And, you know, people kind of accept it with Deion. I think that's why people pay attention to it so much, because Deion is Deion, and I think that obviously Shadeur gets some of that from him. Do you think people ever get to a point where they're just kind of like, oh, well, that's just Shadeur? You know, Shadeur's a great talent, and maybe he has some baggage with him of things like that, but Shadeur has all this talent in the world. He's potential QB1 in next year's draft class. Like, that's just who he is, and if he can back it up on the field, then we're okay with that.
Here's the thing. I think that the position that Shadeur, like, quite literally the football position that he's in, doesn't allow him to be that much. Like, every boisterous, every kind of quote-unquote cocky quarterback has always taken hits because of that.
Yeah.
There's been plenty of wide receivers. There have been plenty of running backs, defensive backs that have gone out and said, you know, I'm the best, I'm this, I'm that, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. And it's kind of not looked past, but there's more acceptance for acting that way just because of the position. When you're the quarterback, there's kind of this idea that you have to be, you know, I don't want to say like professional, but there's a level of professional that you're held to. It's higher than what a running back or a quarterback or a wide receiver would be, just because of you represent the entire team as a whole. And I think that Shadeur might be doing himself a disservice because of this, because when a quarterback acts like this, it's not great. Look, you can have the star-studded wide receiver or the boisterous corner or the showstopper. That Deion Sanders was, by the way. He was a game breaker and he acted this way, but I think if Deion Sanders played quarterback in the NFL, he would have been looked at far less friendly than he already was.
That is a great point about it depends on the type of position that you play, because I agree. I mean, people kind of like their defensive backs to have some nastiness to them. Like, I think of during Josh Norman's prime as an NFL defensive back, that dude was always running his mouth. That dude was always good for a quote that gets plastered all over social media, and people ate that up. I mean, they loved it, especially Carolina fans, and even during his time with Washington, like those matchups between him and OBJ, people loved that, and they sought after it because both of those guys didn't steer away from being out in the media or keeping their mouth shut. They kind of like that. But as quarterbacks, anytime they kind of do something wrong or anytime they kind of step out of the business type of zone that they're supposed to be in, then people are kind of like, whoa, like, we need to take a step back here, because they are the face of the franchise more times than not, whether they want to be or not. Like, that is how they are viewed from the fan base and from all of their peers, even non-fans. And so you do have to be a bit more careful, I think, in how you treat yourself and how you showcase yourself to others.
Yeah, and now I will say that if you are someone who can act, boisterous and very confident and kind of, I don't want to say arrogant, but more confident than others, but you back it up and you win games and you have yada, 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 it automatically makes you iconic. Like Michael Jordan had this, Cam Newton had it. Cam Newton's the best example I can think of in my lifetime of a quarterback that was so unapologetically themselves, almost to a point where you look at him like, that guy's so arrogant. You almost didn't like him, but damn if he didn't back it up. He won every game he was at Auburn. He was an MVP in Carolina. He had some great seasons there. So I think that if Shadeur can back it up, it's going to make him that much more iconic. But I think that you're at a point now where you're either going to really put your career over or you're going to hurt it so much. Because if you don't exactly live up to this hype, like if Colorado doesn't go 8-4, 7-5 this year, I think a lot of that's going to fall back on Shadeur, and I think a lot of people are going to come back to these types of tweets and the way Coach Sanders was handling the Colorado locker room.
All right, so let's move on to the other side, or I guess it's kind of like the other side of this story. There was an article that you found about Cormani McClain, obviously is into the transfer portal. We already know what happened with that situation. Kind of felt the same way that Xavier Smith did about he didn't feel like Deion Sanders should have been putting him out in front of everybody and all of his business and whatnot. In the portal, still has not committed to a team, and it doesn't exactly look ideal for a former 5-star recruit.
No, it doesn't, and it's kind of sad, honestly, because he's such a talented player. Now, obviously, I think that there's a team somewhere that's going to, we have to take a chance on this guy. He was I think he was the 14th ranked recruit when he signed. So I mean, he's an elite talent. But the stories that came out from Deion Sanders and kind of the things that are being said about him now, and the fact that other teams, big name teams that could really use him as a position, aren't touching him, I think is kind of alarming for Cormani McClain's camp. Yeah,
I mean, it's pretty telling when these graphics get put out about like, oh, I've heard from these teams, Georgia's logo's on that graphic, and people are like, oh, is Georgia interested in this former 5-star that just left Colorado? And then the list gets dwindled down very quickly to like Memphis, UCF, and USF, like those types of programs. And then you get this article talking about like there's a whole lot of Power 4 football teams that are just completely out on him. And whether that has to do with what Deion said, I'm sure it has a lot to do with what Deion said, but also like checking in on that and knowing like this really didn't turn into anything at Colorado. The rosters are only going to get better more than likely at a whole lot of other schools. There's probably just not a place to take someone like Cormani McClain, especially like, again, this spring window, it's so late in the process. And I think it's the riskiest time of year for you to be entering the portal unless you know for sure that you have a home. This does not feel like one of those scenarios where Cormani McClain entered the portal and he knew exactly where he was going, obviously, because he is not committed yet. But like if you don't have something lined up already, you're probably better off just staying put. Now, again, that's probably very different than McClain's situation because he probably felt like he couldn't just stay put at Colorado because how could you with the way that Deion's talking about you? You know that you're probably not going to get on the field, and a change of scenery is probably what's best for you. So again, I'm sure you're probably right in saying that he is probably going to end up somewhere. Someone's going to take a chance and bring him on a roster somewhere, but certainly an interesting storyline to continue to follow.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of the issue you run into when you enter the portal in the spring because teams are already so strapped for cash at this point. Rosters are kind of filled out. There's so much trepidation, in my opinion. You have to basically be a surefire home run hit for a team to really say, okay, we need to go out and get that guy for sure. Obviously, Cormani McClain's not going to be free wherever he goes.
No.
So the idea of it being a booster and being a head coach or being a team, whatever, and saying like, do we really want to throw an extra bag at this kid who's got so much of this potential downside that we could get burned in the spring when our roster and our budget's already tight? Like, I think that's what you're seeing a lot with.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll just stay in the Big 12 here. The Big 12 has betting lines for who you think will be.
Oh, it's been a while since we've gotten to talk about some betting lines on the show.
So I'm going to play a little guess the lines game of Big 12 teams that are odds to win the Big 12 conference. First off, number one's kind of easy. Who do you think it is?
Utah.
It is Utah, and they share number one spot with who else?
Oh, they share it with someone.
Yeah.
Kansas State?
Yes, correct. So Kansas State and Utah have the best odds at plus 350.
Okay, plus 350.
So who do you think has second odds after that?
Golly. I'm going to go ahead and do this now. I'm going to pull up a list of the Big 12 conference so I don't miss anybody and I don't have a brain fart in the middle of this. I'm like a complete idiot in the middle of this. So let me pull this up real quick. If I had to guess just off rip right now, I would probably say Kansas.
It is Kansas. Kansas is at plus 550, and then Arizona's after behind them with 700. Then Texas Tech plus 800. The next team after that is UCF, at plus 1,000. Who do you think the last team is?
Last? Gosh. Probably Cincinnati has the lowest odds.
Cincinnati is the fourth lowest odds, or excuse me, second lowest. Arizona State, BYU, and Houston are tied with 125 plus 125,000.
3 teams tied for last.
Yes.
Wow.
Colorado came in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, ninth with plus 3,300 odds.
Okay, ninth.
So I mean, for as much hype as there is around Colorado right now, Vegas still isn't seemingly by it. They're listed for record behind TCU, West Virginia, Iowa State, UCF, Texas Tech, like teams that are fine in the Big 12, but if you're banking on Colorado being a playoff team this year, I wouldn't buy it. So that's kind of where I have with that.
Man, I mean, just looking at that list and like thinking of now, like, 10 years ago when you talk about the Big 12, obviously Texas and Oklahoma are in the mix at that point, but now they're stripped away. And even if you strip out Utah from this year, like thinking that Kansas is towards the top of this conference, and not in basketball, this is football that we're talking about. Kansas is at the top of this list. Baylor's probably somewhere near the bottom. They've had a tough stretch or a tough go at things with Dave Arnett out there, or Dave Aranda, I should say.
Baylor's plus 5,000. So right
plus
behind
5,000. Like Baylor's no longer in the top. Colorado creeping up in this list, obviously. Like, I mean, it's just weird how, like, not only how quickly things flip because Oklahoma and Texas are no longer out, which anybody could have seen that coming. Everybody assumed that was going to happen, but you have to be feeling pretty good too if you're Utah, because a lot of teams, like for Texas and Oklahoma, while it's great that you're now in the SEC and it's great now with all this shared revenue coming up that you're now in the SEC and you're not in the Big 12, the opponents that you're going up against within your conference only got tougher. Like there's no more of these bottom feeder teams consistently every single year outside of maybe a handful of them that we know of every single year. Like probably not going to make much shake in the conference. Whereas Utah, you went from a conference that Oregon was on the uprise. USC has Lincoln Riley. Washington was doing some big things with DeBoer to now you're probably going to run that conference, it looks like, every single year until you leave it.
You should at least. I mean, you've got a 30-year-old at quarterback.
If Cam Rising plays this year. It seems like we've been waiting on that one since the Rose Bowl game from forever ago when he put up video game numbers and I was like, oh my gosh, Cam Rising Heisman next year. And now we're still waiting on for him to play. But yeah, Utah being the top dog in a conference, that's got to be good for them. But overall, that conference, I mean... Yeah,
like the thing that sticks out to me is you look at it and... Okay, Utah or Kansas State. I mean, one of the teams is going to make the playoff from the Big 12.
Yeah.
But is there any team on that you would expect that if you put 11 other top college football teams, would you feel confident maybe against the group of 5 team? Yeah. But other than that, like there's no national title contender. Like at least Clemson, or at least you have Clemson and Florida State in the ACC. Say what you want about what Dabo Swinney's been doing, but he's proven he can do it. Like this is clearly the weakest conference in college football, and I don't think it's even close. And I know it's so cliche to say, but it isn't.
No, I would agree with you there that it's really not close. I mean, maybe Kansas State can give someone a run, but like they're one of those football programs like they're going to be good in their conference, but maybe not nationally good enough to be able to hold themselves up there with like the top 15 in the country, and especially not in a playoff scenario. So they might be one of these teams like every 3 or 4 years, which we don't even know if this is going to withstand 3 or 4 years, but like every 3 years, like maybe Kansas State puts something together. It's like, okay, in 7 versus whatever matchup in the first round of the college football playoff, like maybe Kansas State wins that matchup. Like maybe they advance to the second round, but I don't think anybody's ever going to envision the Wildcats as one of these national title contending teams.
And it's not even that. Like when the Pac-12 was at its worst, at least it had brand recognition. Like even if Oregon was 9-3 in a year, at least it was Oregon. At least there was USC. At least there was UCLA. At least there were teams that you recognized nationally. Like if you look at this, like Colorado is the most recognizable team on this list right now, and that's simply because of what Deion Sanders did. Like you take Deion Sanders away from Colorado, and there's nothing in this conference that makes you go, as a casual fan, I'd really like to tune in and watch this. Like Kansas State doesn't excite you. Utah doesn't excite you. Kansas might be one of those teams just because Lance Leipold and that story of rebounding that they've had so far has been kind of exciting. But even then, like there's not a national draw to this. I mean, the Pac-12 part kind of failed because of that, and I think that what about the Big 12 is going to keep them afloat in 5 years? Like, what is going to keep people tuning into this?
That was exactly what I was about to bring up, because at least with the Pac-12, you had Pac-12 After Dark, and you were going to get the crowd that was, all right, I'm done watching college football for the day. Time to sit on the couch, fall asleep. I'm just going to throw on whatever Pac-12 game was on. And like there was some lore to it at least.
Yeah, I lost $300 in the day during Bang. It's time to win my losses back watching UCLA and Arizona State play.
And you'll probably get that a little bit like when it's Utah home games or whatnot, but you would have to imagine too, like if Utah is your premier team in the conference and they have a big matchup for the week, then you probably want to put that in a prime time time slot as opposed to plugging them in at, we're going to kick off at 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. And you probably want to put that in a prime time slot to compete with everybody else and try and draw in anybody that you can. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of teams or even like potential matchups. Like there's not even like some rivalries really within that conference where it's like, okay, I know for sure like that weekend, I'm going to make sure that I find myself a Big 12 football game to watch.
Yeah, I mean, like even looking at this, like there's not really a team that I could say, if this ever blows up, the Big Ten and SEC are going to come calling immediately.
Yeah.
Like these, like obviously though, some teams will get picked up, but there's not one brand on here where it's like, oh my God, that team would fit perfect. Like obviously if the ACC collapses, Florida State and Clemson are getting called by the Big Ten and SEC tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like those are big brand names are going to be picked up. There's not really that in the Big 12. So I think it's going to be very, very interesting to watch how this shakes out in the next few years. And I think that the Big 12, unfortunately, is just going to fall behind to a point where we had for a long time, where there's a Power 5, but we don't really recognize the Pac-12 as a Power 5 team just because there's so much inferior. I think you're at the point now where it's, hey, there's a Power 4, but we don't really recognize the Big 12 just because there's only 3 true superior conferences.
Well, let's flip it over to another conference and a name that Georgia fans are very familiar with. He had a football game this past weekend, and it's over in the Big Ten. Nebraska had their spring game this weekend, and there was a pretty decently sized storyline there of the fact that Dylan Raiola not only had a good day for them, but he also took the most reps out of anybody else in that quarterback room. That includes a sophomore quarterback and also another true freshman. So Dylan Raiola obviously being positioned to be the starting quarterback, what it looks like from the spring game. I'll go ahead and quickly read off the stats right here, and then I'll throw it over to you, Christian, for your thoughts. Dylan Raiola on the day, he completed 16 out of 22 passes for 239 yards and 2 touchdowns on the afternoon. He added a completion on a go-ahead 2-point conversion that gave the white team a 22
they went for 2 in a spring game?
Yeah, they did. 22-21 lead midway through the third quarter. Raiola completed passes to 14 different receivers on the day.
That's impressive. And I mean, look, I said this when they first signed him. Matt Rule has to start this kid. Because what the amount of things that you've put in for him, the amount of work you went through to get him on your campus, if you have him sit for a year and your team stinks, like your fan base is going to spoil very quickly on him. So now it's at a point where, and it looks that way, that Dylan Raiola has to win this team over. And I know there were kind of videos of practices a couple weeks ago where he didn't look great. Guess what? He's a freshman in practice. Like, he's going to make a lot of mistakes. So the fact that he had what it sounds like is a very good game, and it sounds like he's getting the majority of one's reps now, that's something to get you excited if you're a Nebraska fan.
Yeah, and I mean, it's positive. It's reassuring, I should say, for us outsiders from that program too, because we saw the 5-minute clip or whatever it was that they posted on YouTube of the spring practice clips of Dylan Raiola. Didn't exactly look great. Definitely looked like a true freshman in those moments. Got to see the arm talent a little bit there, slinging the pigskin around the football field a little bit, and it looked like that 5-star talent was there, but really wasn't piecing it together. But then you go throw him in live action, and he puts up great numbers, and especially knowing that he got the majority of the workload and he looked that good, or at least the numbers look that good, that has to be promising for Nebraska fans, and also, again, reassuring knowing that, okay, Dylan Raiola probably going to put up some decent numbers at Nebraska, but he's also in a conference that's very tough. It's not, I can't remember exactly what the schedule looks like. I know you're pulling that up right now for us. So how does that schedule look like? That's the biggest question for me.
I mean, it's not that tough. Versus UTEP, versus Colorado, versus Northern Iowa, versus Illinois. You should start 4-0 regardless of who's your quarterback. Mm-hmm. Then your first away game is at Purdue. Should be a win. I think we can say Purdue is a fairly easy ACC team to beat.
Yeah, I mean, from right now, knowing what Purdue usually is, yeah, we can say that.
Then you travel back home for homecoming against Rutgers.
Nice homecoming game.
Then you travel to Indiana. And then here's where you have a tough 5-game slate to close out. You're at Ohio State versus UCLA, at USC versus Wisconsin, at Iowa.
Ooh. Okay.
But tell me why that team shouldn't start 7-0.
So this is, I don't want to do the thing of but this kind of feels like how Colorado was set up last year of okay, you could start off really hot. And this is the only thing that might get Nebraska and Dylan Raiola in trouble a little bit, but it's also a good thing at the same time. So I'll give it both sides of you could start really great, but the last taste in everybody's mouth is going to be you possibly going on a losing streak to end the season and maybe not looking good in those games. Like when you face Iowa, that's a big test for you. When you face Ohio State, that defense is freaking loaded. You may not look exactly great against the Buckeyes. And that's probably what everybody's going to know, because probably going to be a lot of people tuning in to see what Dylan Raiola looks like more than halfway through the season against Ohio State loaded defense. And if it doesn't look great, then that's kind of what the takeaway is going to be from Dylan Raiola's freshman season. But also the good thing is you get the whole first half of the season to get his feet wet if he is a starter, get him a lot of reps, get him comfortable before you face your own Devil's Row of Ohio State, UCLA, USC, and then Iowa to close it out.
Yeah, I think another thing is like use those first 6 or 7 games to build the hype around you.
Yeah.
Like if you have a person wake up one day and go, holy shit, Nebraska's 6-1 and they're ranked 13th in the country. Like that's going to be insane. Now, obviously, it's going to come crashing down the last 5 weeks, but say you win a game out of Ohio State, UCLA, USC, Wisconsin, Iowa. Say you start 6-1 and finish the season 9-4 or 8-4. Like that's a very successful first season if you're Dylan Raiola. So I think the thing for Colorado, Nebraska is going to have to be is build enough hype up in the start of the year. And then obviously when shit gets rough, have built so much momentum at the start that you can go through a bad time and be like, hey, look, we're still young. This is kind of what we expected. But if you walk into Columbus, Ohio at 4-3, like things aren't going to go very well for you.
Yeah, probably not. And I'm interested, I mean, typically college football fans don't have a whole lot of patience to them, but I'm interested to see how much patience there is here, because this is essentially what Matt Rhule is hitching his wagon to. He's hitching his wagon to how successful is Dylan Raiola going to be in his college football season and in his career, and hopefully he ends up staying there and he makes a career out of it with them. But I mean, that's kind of what your success is coattailed to right now. And so if it works out, then that's great. That's great for Matt Rhule. I think he's a great coach, and I think he's going to be able to figure this out over there. But a whole lot of this is riding on, does the 5-star quarterback, number 1 overall player in the country, does he play to that standard, and does he bring Nebraska up to this upper tier college football program that they were 20 plus years ago? Yeah,
2024 needs to be the building block season where people say, oh man, Nebraska's a team to look out for in 2025. They started so well. Dylan Raiola is going to be a sophomore. Hey, they might be a sleeper for a playoff contention. So, I mean, we kind of just did a real quick pseudo set the bar for Nebraska. So we had one in Arkansas. Do you want to do that real quick?
Ooh, Arkansas. This one's a little, usually like when we're setting the bar, we're doing it for teams of like, oh, they're probably going to have a pretty successful season, but we need to set the bar of like how successful does it need to be. This one feels more like how successful does Arkansas need to be to make sure Sam Pittman sticks around? Yeah,
I mean, Sam Pittman's obviously the guy who's coaching for his job right now. This is going into his 5th season, I believe. He started in 2020.
Yeah.
And it just hasn't gone the way that teams really would like it to. So I've kind of studied their schedule. You start off at playing UAPB. I'm not sure what team that is. Then you go to Oklahoma State. You face UAB at home, on your home. Then you travel to Auburn, and then obviously you're in Arlington for Texas Tech. That's 5 games, and then you travel back home for Tennessee. So in those 6 games, I don't think you can lose more than 3. I think that Texas A&M, Tennessee, and Auburn are probably your 3 likely losses. I think you have to win those first 3, or you can, drop 1 and then upset Tennessee or something like that. But you have to start 3-3 on the season.
Yeah, this is kind of how I broke it down when I looked at the schedule. I said off rip, I see 7 losses, which puts him at 5-7 this year for Arkansas.
And that is fired.
Yeah, that is fired.
They have to at minimum make a bowl.
Yeah, I said I think he needs to be at the very minimum 7-5 probably. Like I don't even know if 6-6 is good enough. I think you probably need to be definitely like in the plus in the win column. Like you can't even be tied with the same number of losses just to have that safety entering the offseason for you. So that means, but that also means for them, like you're having to beat 2 of either Missouri, Texas, Ole Miss, LSU, Texas A&M, Oklahoma State, or Tennessee. Like Oklahoma State seems like the safest bet there. All the other ones,
it's a road game too. So it's not like bottom line, I think Sam Pittman's in a lot of trouble. And I hate to say it because I like him a lot and I think he's a good person and a good coach, but the Sam Pittman experience, I don't know what Arkansas expected when they got him. Obviously, things started off great. They started off like 3-0 or 4-0 in 2020.
Yeah.
They made it all the way to top 10 in 2021, and then things have kind of just slowly declined after that. So I think that if Sam Pittman keeps his job this year, it'll be because they started 3-0, and they won a couple of games they probably shouldn't have. Like if you sneak a win out of LSU or at Missouri or maybe even against Tennessee, like I think that will be enough to save your job. But obviously, like there's a very real possibility they lose 5 of their last 6 games.
Yeah.
LSU at Mississippi State, against Ole Miss, Texas, Louisiana Tech, Missouri. Like the only really like that should be a win is Louisiana Tech. Every other one of those is like they might lose that game.
Yeah, I mean, that last half stretch of the season, there's a chance that if you go on a losing streak, you probably don't even make it out of the season. Like, if it gets really ugly against some of those opponents, you're probably not making it out there alive. I mean, it's just a tough break. And the thing, too, is like, for the past couple of years with Arkansas, the whole thing has been like, we know what they are. We know that roster probably isn't built to compete against some of these upper-tier SEC West teams or even some of the SEC East teams that they were competing with. But at the very least, they had KJ Jefferson, which everybody felt like was a game changer for them. And so if you could ride his shoulders enough, if he did enough that game, you were going to be in a position to potentially beat them. Like that's what it was last year when they were hanging in there with Alabama until late in the game. It was because KJ Jefferson was having a great game and he was basically beating Alabama by himself. Well, KJ Jefferson is at UCF now. You no longer have this ability to just give it to your quarterback, QB sneak it 10 times a game and see what he can make shake for you. Like this is going to be a time of year where it's potentially your last season, Sam Pittman, and you're going to have to really scheme something up offensively. And you're going to have to, with Petrino, you're going to have to figure things out and do things completely different than what you've had to in years past. And especially knowing with the added pressure of my job is on the line this year, it's going to get very interesting very quickly for them out there. And you, without a doubt, cannot start off rocky at the beginning of this season. Like you have got to start smooth sailing, go ahead and add up the wins when you can, because that last stretch of the season, again, like it could get ugly and ugly enough to the point where you can't survive it. It's not possible.
What do you think the ideal season for an Arkansas fan is this year? Like, because we always set the bars like this is the baseline of you have to, like if you want to save your job. I mean, obviously the ideal perfect season is you win the national title, but like with realistic expectations here, what do you think? 7-5?
I think it is 7-5. No, like if you understand what the schedule looks like and you understand the opponents you had to face off against, I think that if you can come out with 7 wins there, I think that's a win for Arkansas. Again, I don't think it is just about being bowl eligible. I'm not sure bowl eligible is good enough. Like if Sam Pittman leaves this season or leaves the regular season, it's like, okay, Arkansas, we're giving the Razorbacks a bid to the Gasparilla Bowl. I don't know that the fans are too hyped up about that one, but at least if you get a bid to like one of these smaller bowls and you're 7-5, knowing you went 7-5 against this type of schedule, I think there's a whole lot more positivity to come out of this because again, 7-5 means that you beat 2 more of these teams of like LSU, Ole Miss, Texas, Missouri, or even Tennessee, like those types. And Texas A&M is also in this mix. Like if you beat 2 of those teams, then that is absolutely a win for Arkansas.
And another thing that I think Sam Pittman has to be careful of, and there's nothing he can control with this, but if KJ Jefferson goes and balls for UCF,
I think he will.
Like Gus Malzahn knows how to use a guy like KJ Jefferson. We've seen in the past with Nick Marshalls and Cam Newtons and other guys like that. So having a mobile quarterback or someone who can kind of run the ball and be that type of threat with a big arm is very dangerous for Gus Malzahn. And the better that KJ Jefferson does for UCF is going to be much worse for Sam Pittman because the mantra is going to be you let that guy walk, you let the best quarterback Arkansas had kind of leave the room. And as soon as if Arkansas quarterback, who is it going to be this year?
Dude, I couldn't even tell you. I'll look it up.
Whoever Arkansas's starting quarterback is going to be, if he has one bad game, immediately people are going to go, well, imagine if you had KJ Jefferson, you wouldn't have had this problem. You would have probably won the game. And that's all going to fall on Sam Pittman. So I think it's going to be very, very hard for Sam Pittman to keep his job here. I'm rooting for him. There's an avenue for it, but the line of this was a great season. We achieved all of we overachieved way compared to what our schedule was, and this was a very disappointing season. I think it's 2 wins. It's such a thin margin.
So they took a transfer, our lads has Taylon Green listed as a starter, but Malachi Singleton is on the roster as well. So they definitely have a QB battle going on over there. Just right now, I would probably say Malachi Singleton might end up being the starter if I had to say today, just out of my perspective. So, I mean, it's not horrible. The quarterback room isn't like detrimental to where like it's to the point of I don't even know if you can do it at all because of just what you have available to you. I think there is maybe some sort of avenue. And again, like there's some questions about LSU. So like we're sitting here today knowing what LSU has done the past 2 seasons with Brian Kelly, and they've been very successful. But that's talking about LSU in May or April, late April, almost May, but we have no idea what LSU at that point in the season is going to look like. Like maybe there is some struggle. Maybe it is a bit of a struggle bus with Nussmeier and some of the lack of weapons that they have out there because they did lose so many of them to the draft. Maybe there's some adjustment out there, and maybe Texas A&M in the first year with Mike Elko, like there's some questions there as well. So I think there is some way of an avenue, and it could potentially happen, but it's looking very gleam.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough for Sam Pittman this year. That's all I have for the Arkansas, and I think that's all we've got for the local hour. But obviously, we have another hour coming. This is the next, or not the local hour, the national hour. Next hour is the local hour, so be sure to stay tuned for that and don't go anywhere.
Hey, you want to know what's better, NIL or NFL? I'll tell you here in about 30 seconds.
Hell yeah, Jay Will.
Welcome into Talk the Dog, the show where we find a bone to pick and a take to give. These are not hot takes. These is dog takes. Can I talk that dog?
What's up? You really like that?
Let's shut up and grind some tape.
$4.1 million. That's how much a contract is worth for the final pick in this year's NFL draft, plus a signing bonus of $80,000. There were 257 picks in this year's NFL draft, and the very last name to come off of the board got a contract for $1 million a year. So it got me thinking, if we drafted the 257 best players in college football right now, would the 257th best player in college football be earning $1 million per year from their college? I would probably venture to say no. If you go on On3's website right now and you look at their NIL evaluation chart, the top name on the list will be Shadeur Sanders, Deion Sanders' son, Colorado starting quarterback, potential #1 overall pick in 2025. His valuation is set at $4.6 million right now. So the top player in college football, according to NIL valuation, is essentially equivalent to Mr. Irrelevant in the NFL draft right now. I think college football fans, we tend to exaggerate the amount of NIL money that is out there. Now, don't get me wrong. Players are making money, and that's great. That's what we wanted. We wanted student athletes to be able to have this opportunity to make money for themselves because they deserve that. But NIL hasn't taken away from the ultimate end goal for most of these college athletes. We can assume that the majority of college football players right now entered their careers with the intention of one day playing in the NFL. Even if you aren't a first-round pick, or even if you aren't a fifth-round pick, you could still land a contract of $1 million per year. You see, I bring this to the table today because it was announced that former Georgia running back Kendall Milton, who was not drafted, he was signed as an undrafted free agent with the Philadelphia Eagles, didn't even make the top 257 players in this year's NFL draft. And you want to know what his contract was worth?
I'm going to guess it's more than $100,000.
Milton got a $25,000 signing bonus, $225,000 of salary guaranteed for $250K in total guarantees. Jesus. I don't know how much Kendall Milton made at the University of Georgia during his career, but I would venture to say it isn't as much as what he's making in the NFL right now after signing as an undrafted free agent. And, hold on. But do you think that every college, and you know what? You might be saying, Jay, well, not all money in the NFL is guaranteed. They don't always get that money. Like, you could be cut, just because it says $4 million doesn't mean that they're going to be getting that $4 million. And you would be absolutely right. But do you not think that salaries are being cut in college football? NIL deals are being stripped apart from these kids? Outside of winning games, developing players, and obtaining rings, the biggest goal for college football programs right now is to put their players into the league. Georgia has done that more than anyone over the last 5 years, and their players are seeing the benefits of this. This year, Georgia had 8 total players taken in the NFL draft, and you want to know what their projected salaries combined are worth? $73 million. That's probably close to triple what some of these big programs are spending every single year on their entire college football roster, which is a culmination of 85 scholarship players plus whatever walk-ons you have as well. So again, 8 draft picks for projected combined $73 million for the University of Georgia. NIL money is great. It's great that these college football players can make that money during their 4 or 5 year, 3-year careers during that time. But college athletes making money in the NFL should be the ultimate goal, and the University of Georgia and their dominance in the NFL should continue to hold precedence over NIL.
Yeah, it is crazy to put it into that kind of perspective, to think about how, whatever Kendall Milton made during his time at Georgia, it's probably making that four times over in the NFL, and that's just being on the roster. That's not being the starting running back. That's not being the star. That's not being, a grinder for the University of Georgia for 4 years. And by the way, it's probably going to be easier. Life for Kendon Milton probably just got a lot easier, not because he made a bunch of money, but because you're not having to go to classes every day. You're not going to practice and getting your head bashed in like they do on Georgia. Like, there's no bloody Tuesday in Philadelphia. These guys are professionals. These guys are guys that want to take care of their bodies, like want to be able to play as long as they can. So you're not having these types of practices. So, I mean, life in the NFL is so much better than NIL. And obviously there are incentives to stay back for a 5th, 6th, sometimes even 7th season and make hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the end goal, like you said, should always be to go to the NFL, even if you're an undrafted free agent like we just saw.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we get so caught up in NIL, and it is a whole lot of money that some of these players are getting, and they're able to make a whole lot of it, especially because some of these kids, they go to one school, they get a bag, and then they go to the next, bag chasing, like that's what we like to call it. And again, it's great that these players are able to do that. It's great that they're able to get their bread, because NFL is not guaranteed. You're not guaranteed to get there. You don't know your future. You don't know what could happen. So get your money while you can. But at the end of the day, like, if you look at a program like Georgia, who has put in 49 total draft picks in the last 5 years, which is more than any other college football program, like, that has to sit with you a little bit if your end goal is to go to the NFL. Like, if that's what I'm trying to do, like, and, while Georgia may not be spending NIL money like a whole lot of some of these other programs, right, they're at least spending it enough to where you're going to be all right. You're not going to be broke. You're not going to be pinching money. You're not going to be pinching for change or anything like that. Like, you're still going to be bringing in money. And then also you have that reassurance of, like, my odds of making the NFL are higher than basically anywhere else in college football. Now, there's some other programs too that develop NFL talent at a very close, similar rate to this. But again, like, if your end goal is to go to the NFL, like, these schools that can get you there and are proving it time and time again that they can get you there, then, I mean, it's hard to ignore that. But it's also hard to ignore when you're a high school kid coming out as a 4-star recruit or 5-star recruit, and these schools are just throwing money at you.
Yeah, I mean, there's collegiate teams offering life-changing money, and I would venture to say that Kirby Smart's counter argument to that would be the life-changing money comes when you get drafted after you play for our team, and it comes way more than however much a Ohio State or whatever other teams spending money can throw at you. So it obviously makes sense as to why NFL is superior in all these ways, and it makes sense as to why players come to Georgia. Because the career outlook on their end, the end goal for them is to make the NFL, and the outlook on that is so much higher when you go there, whereas opposed to, I don't know, some other teams that it's probably not going to be as high.
I mean, think of it this way too, like, Zion Logue was a 6th-round pick with the Atlanta Falcons, and again, I have no idea what Zion Logue was making at the college level, but he just signed a contract too for $1 million per year. It's a 4-year contract for his rookie contract. Now, he has to earn that money. He has to continue to obtain a roster spot, but the fact that that's available now for Zion Logue, like, that's big time money. I mean, that's probably life-changing money that you can just walk into there and that you probably didn't have access to again at the University of Georgia. Like, because you got to the NFL, because you were at the University of Georgia, and even when his production was not at the level of some of these other defensive linemen in this year's class, he still was a 6th-round pick, and now he has a contract to his name with, again, $1 million per year.
Yeah, I don't think people really take into consideration how, yes, there are college football players making $1 million this year. Yeah. Like that, they exist. Like, there are starting quarterbacks for number 1 NIL programs that are going to be making more than 6 figures this year. But that does not include the 2nd-string defensive lineman or the running back that gets 40 touches a season. Like, those guys have to grind to get to the NFL to make that kind of money. Like, the $1 million NIL deal is not around for everyone. There's probably like 10 to 15 players in all of college football that are making that. So I think that the common fan kind of forgets that there's not a lot of people out there that are making this kind of money in college. They're making good money now. They're making money way better than they were 20 years ago, where it was, hey, here's $20K in a duffel bag if you commit to our school. But now it's a not essentially, but it's a salary. So I think that you just have to keep in mind the NFL will always be superior in this regard, even with when we eventually get to a revenue sharing split.
Yeah, and even these players that are making $1 million a year or whatever from their universities, like Brock Powers just got a contract worth $18 million. Like, that's a huge step up for whatever Brock Bowers was worth in college. You know, like even those types of players who are the caliber that these programs think are worth pouring in absurd amounts of cash into them, like getting to the NFL, that immediately increases your money by tenfold. So, I mean, the NFL being the end goal for anybody, whether it be the second string defensive lineman on the roster or it's the 5-star quarterback that has been playing for the last 3 years and won a Heisman, is going to be the number 1 overall pick. Like NFL money is going to continue to hold precedence over NIL money. And I don't see that changing anytime soon.
No, it doesn't. Now, if you're someone who probably isn't going to make it to the NFL and will not have NFL money at your disposal, a good way to increase your money is going over to Prize Picks and using promo code Brooks. What is it? $100 deposit that's matched instantly for first-time users. That means if you put $100 in, you get $100 back in free credit. So be sure to go over to Prize Picks and use promo code Brooks. He'll be thankful that we did that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
two ad reads in one show.
Hey, man, I can't tell you how many times where, strip for a little bit of cash, get a little flex play on the weekend, double your money, sometimes even 25 multiplier on that money. It can save you sometimes. It can also put you in the hole. But, man, you just, again, first-time user deposit match, $100 in, $100 back. You can't beat that. I mean, that's free money that you're playing with at that point.
You can only lose 100% of your money, but you can gain 500% of it. So just keep that in mind when you're going over.
That's a great perspective to have.
Jeez, I probably shouldn't be. But no, the next thing I want to talk about was how this is kind of late news, but it's also something that I think just needs to be put back into perspective because it's going to be such a big deal when it comes around. This weekend in Austin, Texas, when Georgia and Texas play, might be one of the most insane weekends around sports at all. So obviously you have Georgia versus Texas in Austin. That's going to bring hundreds of thousands of people because first SEC matchup between these two teams. They're powerhouse teams. It's their first time playing since 2020. Georgia fans obviously, or 2019. Georgia fans obviously remember that 2019 Sugar Bowl off the 2018 season. So it's going to be a huge game. Now, combine that with the fact that you have F1 coming to town. For those of you who don't know, F1 is probably one of the biggest sports outside of America. Like, it's huge in Europe. It's huge in a lot of South American countries. Like, it's massive. You're going to have millions of people flooding in for that. And oh, by the way, Eminem and Sting are now also coming to town.
For the F1 race.
Oh God, that's what it's for?
Yeah, I'm pretty like they're doing some type of, I'm sure, like pre-concert, whatever. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's linked to the F1 race.
So if you haven't booked a hotel for this game, it's probably too late. So I just want to float that. This could be one of the most insane weekends ever.
Dude, I mean, the headlines that could potentially come out of this, not only the game, but again, like everything that is happening in that city. Like, if you haven't gotten your hotel now, you're going to be staying in San Marcos.
Get a tent, buddy.
You're going to be having an hour drive to the stadium, which is fine. Not a bad place to stay. I've done it myself. You can make it work. It's not too bad, but it's going to be a fun time that weekend. There's going to be a whole lot. I mean, that town is going to be buzzing probably from Monday because people are going to get in early for that football game. I mean, people are going to want to make that one a vacation, stay a long time, have a good time. I'm sure the city of Austin is very much looking forward to the influx of cash that is about to happen during that time. But like, it's already a big enough game. It's setting up to be a big enough game. And I think the fact that it's early enough in the season to where there's not one of these opportunities for either team to have one of these slip-ups to maybe hinder the headlines or make it seem like it's not that big of a game. But I mean, it's two programs that hardly ever play one another. I mean, the last time was in the Sugar Bowl a few years ago, in which Texas got the best of Georgia. But these are two of the biggest programs now in college football. Like, you're thinking 1, 2, 3 now that Ohio State's in the mix as well. But like 1, 2, 3 in all of college football. I mean, the only thing that can make it bigger is like Quinn Ewers gets hurt. Arch Manning all of a sudden is now the starting quarterback against Georgia. Like, could you imagine what that would be like then for that game?
I mean, that just makes me think about what 2025 is going to be like when Arch Manning eventually does take over as a starter and heads into Athens, Georgia, a place that did their damnedest to recruit him. So it's... I'm excited. I'm also kind of dreading that weekend all together because I just know it's going to be so jam-packed when we get there. But it's going to be so much fun.
Oh, it's going to be so... It'll probably be like anything... It'll be like nothing else that we've ever seen before.
I ranked it as Georgia's hardest game of 2024.
I would agree with that. I think it absolutely is. Not only because of what Texas is, but because of the environment you're about to go into. Like, that crowd is going to be absolutely unhinged.
Like, yeah, you haven't won a game in Tuscaloosa since 2007, but that's because Nick Saban was there, 1. And 2, like, there's going to be growing pains for that team. And yes, it's Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And then, obviously, Oxford's going to be a lot of fun with Lane Kiffin and everything they've done in the transfer portal there. But this Texas game is going to be... It's probably going to be the most highly anticipated game of the season.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely one of those games where, like, 30 years from now, you're bragging to your grandkids of saying, like, yeah, Your grandpa was at that game.
I was there.
I was there, and maybe potentially on the sidelines for that game. You'll keep you guys posted on that one, maybe. That's maybe a pipe dream for that one, but I would definitely be there regardless if I have a ticket or not. Like, I just want to go experience that because, like we're mentioning now, like that game is going to be like unlike anything else. It's probably the biggest game of the entire college football season.
Gotta be.
That's without
Regular
looking at the rest of the slate for the entire season. But I mean, Georgia versus Texas again. It's hard to get much bigger than that here in 2024.
For sure. Have we done a welcome in for this yet?
We haven't. You want to welcome in the local fans?
Welcome in, local fans. If you're tuning in for the second hour and you notice that Brooks isn't here, it's because he's not here. He's probably on his way back from Alpharetta right now. He had to do some changing in his spring tour, so he went to Alpharetta instead of Manchester, so they didn't start practice till 7:30. Have you ever had a high school team start practice at 7:30?
I was always morning practice, man, which, sucked having to get up at like 4:30 in the morning, but I was also grateful because morning practice meant you go from 5:30 to 7:30 and then the rest of your day is open. Now, again, you got to get up, but yeah, I was never a late practice. We were always like, you were either 5:30 in the morning or we were 5:30 in the afternoon and you go to 7:30.
Yeah, we were on the field at 3:45 after school, but nevertheless, still a loaded show for you. We're going to talk about ranking some of these position groups of all time under Kirby Smart. Just go through, list off, hey, this defensive background was probably the best thing, such as that. And then there's even more players getting first overall pick love in the 2025 NFL draft. I know we touched on Carson.
NFL draft love. Gotta love that.
Dude, these mock drafts are getting kind of insane. Like the week after the NFL draft, when everyone just floods the algorithm with 2025 mock drafts, like I get it, but it also like I fall for it every time.
Yeah, I mean, it's every time you see them, like I don't care what time of the year it is. As soon as you see mock draft, everybody's clicking on that sucker, and it almost gets to the point where you don't even care who did it. You just want to see it, and then everybody just say like, "Oh, latest mock draft has this person's name at the top." So I mean, it does get a bit ridiculous, and they change so often. But I mean, it's still worth talking about, especially because I mean, it's far ahead, but it's also a lot of times these like top 15 players, they kind of stay true throughout the year unless you just have a major drop off or someone emerges himself, which both of those things always happen. But a lot of these names kind of stay true within that range.
Yeah. So do you want to introduce this ranking group segment since it was your idea?
I do want to introduce. I think this one would be a fun one. I thought this would be a great one for our local fans specifically because, I mean, Georgia has, again, another loaded roster, one flooded with NFL talent. And Georgia has had some great rosters over the years as well. But I thought it would be fun to say, okay, 2024 Georgia quarterback room, how does that stack up against the other Kirby Smart quarterback rooms over the years? Like, where would you rank that amongst the others? So we're ranking the positions by the all-time position groups under Kirby Smart. And we'll do exactly what I just mentioned. We're going to start with the quarterback room.
Before we do that, let's also mention, like, we kind of wanted to keep it simple and keep it confined just so we didn't run out of time on the show. So linebackers are one group. That includes Mike linebackers. That includes inside linebackers. DBs are one group. That includes star, safety, corners. D-line's one group. That includes defensive nose tackles, edges. We even probably should throw in jacks on that just because now I know that they're not the same position and the jack is technically a third linebacker that plays on the outside. But just for this purpose, we're going to put them in the D-line.
Yeah, so all right, we'll start it off with quarterback. This one wasn't exactly the toughest amongst all of them. In my opinion, I think this is the best quarterback room that Kirby Smart has ever had during his time at Georgia. I think especially with the addition of Rashada, I think Carson Beck is the most talented quarterback he's ever had. He's the most polished quarterback. So I think him alone really ticks up the needle a good bit. And then you have Gunnar Stockton, a multiple-year guy who's looked really good this spring. You bring in another guy like Rashada who already has college experience and is probably going to be the third string on your roster. And then Ryan Puglisi, who everybody's already raving about in the short stint that he had this year in spring practice. So I had him at number one, I had them at number one, but I think that rivals the room in Stetson's final season, which was also a really, really good one because you had Stetson, Carson Beck, and Brock Vandegrift on the roster.
I had 2022 as my number one season simply because at this point, Stetson Bennett was a proven winner. Like everything that happened in 2020, he had overcome. He won the Orange Bowl. He won the national championship in 2021. And let's be honest, he played his best football in 2022. Now combine that with the fact that his backup was a guy who might go number one overall in Carson Beck, and then the third string was a guy in Brock Vandegrift who is super talented, was a 4 or 5 star quarterback at the time. Yeah, I think that was a very talented room when it comes to the first three depth. Now obviously you get to fourth, it's Jackson Muschamp, I think.
Yeah, something like that, So
it's not as deep as 2024, but I think there were more proven commodities there.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like if Brock Vandegrift goes to Kentucky this year and he absolutely balls out, it's only going to move that room up there. So I think they're really, really close. It's really dependent on probably how Carson Carson Beck finish his career, because we know how Stetson finished his career, 2-time national title winner, and he was a Heisman finalist, and we're waiting and seeing if Carson's going to do that this year. So I think they're really, really close, but I think just because Carson is the best quarterback that Kirby Smart has ever had, that just made me push them over the edge to put them at number 1.
Now, I had 2023 as my number 2, and that was simply because of the depth that you had with, you had essentially 3 guys that I think you would have thrown out there and been comfortable with starting.
Yeah.
Carson Beck, Gunnar Stockton, Brock Vandagriff, or Brock Vandagriff, Gunnar Stockton. Now, obviously, those guys ended up transferring away, but I think that was another extremely talented room. My third team that I had ranked was the 2021 room. Now, that room's kind of weird to look back on just because so many of those pieces didn't end up staying, but you had Stetson Bennett, you had JT Daniels. You essentially had 2 starting quarterbacks throughout that year.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably something that can be said. And then who was the third string? That Carson Beck. You had a sophomore Carson Beck that had, from all accounts, had a great spring. I remember coming into that 2021 season, it was, hey, Carson Beck is QB2 here.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until the UAB came and they said, we're going to go with a guy with experience, that they moved him down to QB3. But Carson Beck very well could have started some games in that 2021 season. So they have them as my third spot.
Do you think the 2017 room at least deserves a shout out, maybe?
I have them as my honorable mention simply because Jake Fromm, what he did freshman year was very good. Obviously, it got your team the national title. You had a 5-star in Jacob Eason sitting on the bench, an extremely talented prospect. Then you had Bryce Ramsey. I don't know if people remember that name.
I didn't remember that until today either.
Former punter. And then obviously Stetson Bennett himself was your 4th-string walk-on wearing the double deuce. So that QB room deserves a shout out, I think, just because of
hindsight 22, knowing what it was. Absolutely. I think that is worth a shout out.
What position group do you want to go to next?
Let's do the running backs. And again, we're for some of these, especially like running backs, we're going to base this off of 3 deep. So like for this year, you're thinking like Trevor Etienne, you're thinking Roderick Robinson, and like a healthy Branson Robinson. Like when he gets back, like those are probably going to be your top 3 backs. So that's how we're going to evaluate this year's running back room.
Before you go, let's just say number 1 on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Nick Chubb, Sonny Michel, DeAndre Swift, like 2017. I don't know that you'll ever beat that.
They were 5 deep in that room.
Yeah.
I mean, you had Nick Chubb, Sonny Michel, DeAndre Swift as your 3-headed monster. And then, oh, by the way, when you got tired of that, you handed Elijah Holyfield and Brian Herring the ball. 2 guys that ended up being stars for you in the next 2 or 3 seasons.
Yeah, Elijah Holyfield, 1,000-yard rusher.
Yeah, everyone on that list was a 1,000-yard rusher.
Yeah. So
like that's insane to me. Like there's never going to be a running back room like that again. I don't think at Georgia.
Yeah, so I think they're obviously number 1, shadow of a doubt. No thoughts about it. I mean, they're number 1, and I think again they're going to be for probably the rest of time. I'm not sure you're ever going to get a running back room like that ever again, but you could. I mean, this year's room is very deep, so you could get some names like that. And then I also went ahead and put James Cook, Zamir White, and Kenny McIntosh. That group in 2021.
Okay, so you and me had the same 1 and 2 then.
Okay, I think that 2021 room is really, really good. I mean, Kenny McIntosh being your 3rd option, and then you obviously we saw what he did in 2022. I think I'm going ahead and giving them the nod over this year's group, but I have this year's group at number 3, and I think it just has to be of the fact of we're still kind of waiting and seeing a little bit with this year's group. There's no doubt that there's talent, and they're extremely talented there at running back this year, and they're going to be great. Just like for right now, haven't seen it yet. Going to go ahead and give the nod to 2021. Yeah,
that 2021 group. I mean, it's very similar to 2017 in that you were 5 deep and you had 5 guys that contributed. Now, you didn't have as many 1,000-yard rushers, and you have legendary names like Nick Chubb, Sonny Michel, but you had still Kendall Milton. He was banged up throughout the year. Dejon Edwards for your mop-up duty, and obviously you had the 3-headed monster and James Cook, Zamir White, and Kenny McIntosh. So you were 5 deep there again, like 5 quality backs that all ended up starting for you at some point. My number 3 running back room was that 2019 room.
Ooh,
when you had DeAndre Swift and Brian Herring. I think that was a very good room. You know what? Actually, I'll say the 2018 room. Just throw Elijah Holyfield.
Yeah, might as well get the 3rd one in there as well.
Yeah, because I mean, 2019 and 2018 were very similar, except they didn't have Holyfield. So I'll say that was my 3rd best running back room.
Gotcha. So you're leaving this year's room off the top 3 list for now.
Yeah, just because I think that there's so much unproven there, and it's also going to be a wait and see room.
Gotcha.
Like that room's going to get a lot deeper in the middle of the season when Branson Robinson comes, and the depth obviously took a hit with Andrew Paul hitting the transfer portal. But I think that obviously Roderick Robinson's going to be a great player. Obviously Trevor Etienne is everything that we hoped he was going to be, it seems like. So it's a great room, but when you look back at the 2021, 2017 room, like those guys proved it. They were great.
I think what maybe kind of put this room already in the top 3 a little bit is because Trevor Etienne, we kind of see as that is an NFL guy. And while Georgia has had people that we think are NFL ready and guys that are going to get drafted eventually, like this is one that, for the first time in quite a while, that we're like, that dude is definitely going to be a draft pick in one of the higher rounds. James Cook was that as well, but I think Trevor Etienne being in this room and obviously knowing Roderick Robinson is going into year 2, if Branson Robinson can be healthy, then I think that really tips him over the curve as well.
What do you want to do next?
I got the defensive backs next.
Okay.
I think this one's really interesting. I'll let you lead it off this time.
So the best defensive back room, I think, was the 2022 room. Now, obviously, 2021 is a great room. I have them at second, but defensive backs seem so much deeper in 2022. With the addition of Malachi Starks and him ending up being who he was as a true freshman, you didn't have to worry about who your star was going to be necessarily. Like, you had Christopher Smith and Malachi Starks as your safeties. 2 just all-out great players. Yeah. Both are going to be NFL guys. And then, by the way, we threw Javon Bullard at star. He's an NFL guy now, played tremendously in 2023, even though it's a different position. And if any of those guys got tired or needed a breather, you had... what's his name? Dan Jackson, who, by all accounts, is an SEC starter. I declared that after the G-Day. And then your corners, Kamari Lassiter and Keely Ringo. I think Kamari Lassiter is one of the best Georgia corners to come out of Georgia, under the Kirby Smart era. I mean, other than DeAndre Baker, Tyson Campbell, and a few other guys, like Kamari Lassiter goes up there with the other echelon. And then obviously Keely Ringo. Keely Ringo is just an iconic name for Georgia. So I think that's one of the deepest DB rooms that you've had in a while.
My top room, I went with 2020.
Ooh,
you had
that's
Eric
my number
Stokes,
3.
You had Tyson Campbell, and you had Tyreek Stevenson as like your 3 guys. I didn't even put the safeties in this group, but if I'm trying to remember correctly, Richard LeCount was a part of that group. He didn't end the season healthy, but he was by all means a part of that group. Lewis Seen was a freshman at the time, I believe, maybe a redshirt freshman.
He was a redshirt freshman.
So Lewis Seen's in that group as well. He got some playing time. I mean, I think that defensive back room, I think that to me is the best one that Georgia's had in quite a while, especially knowing like Eric Stokes, when he's healthy in the NFL, he's one of the better defensive backs. Tyson Campbell has really come along with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's become a known commodity as well. I think there's a lot of really good names in that 2020 room. That
was a defensive back room for me that on paper was so deep. Man. So, like, one of the best rooms on paper. But I feel like that the 2020 season obviously put a hurt on it because you had guys having to sit for COVID. And it felt like just the way that season shook out. Like, obviously, Richard LeCount missed, like, 6 of the 10 games they played because of motorcycle accident. And Lewis Seen with the Florida Kyle Pitts targeting, which is still kind of funny. So, like, that team never really got a chance to play together. And then by the time like you were playing in the bowl game, like there were opt-outs. I think Tyreek Stevenson ended up starting at corner for team just because
played great.
Yeah, he played great. But that might always be one of those what might have been groups for me, just because like on paper it was elite. On paper it was stacked, but we never really got to see that unit as a whole flesh out.
Yeah.
That's why I have it at number 3.
Gotcha. I have 2022 as my second group.
Okay.
Again, I think you hit the nail on the head there with everything you said. That group is tremendously talented, very deep as well. A lot of good names in there. And then I put this year's group at number 3 because they have the depth. Everything is there. Malachi Starks being added in this mix. Maybe Ellis Robinson comes along as well. Julian Humphrey, Daniel Harris, both seem like NFL-ready guys, and we're kind of waiting and seeing what they do this year. But that's why they are at number 3 for me, because it's hard to project what some of these rooms are going to be this year, because while they've gotten reps over the last couple seasons, and we've seen them in small portions throughout the year in 2023, it's hard to say like this year that we know exactly what they're going to be. But like if Dalen Everett does end up playing star, and you can play both of Daniel Harris, and then you can also play Julian Humphrey, and then Malachi Starks also over top at safety, like that's hard to beat as a secondary group. Yeah, no, by the way, it seems like your late additions are going to be hits. Like Jake Pope, we thought was just going to be a body at first. And then obviously KJ Bolden, the signing day flip, like 2 guys that you weren't really expecting to have in your room this time a year ago are now like going to be probably major contributors. So it's definitely a room with the most potential. I'm just hesitant to say it's one of the best Kirby Smart's had, just because I agree they haven't played a game yet. Absolutely. Fair enough. Where do you want to go next? Let's do linebackers. This one's tough. This one is tough because like if you think about it, there's been elite, like let's do number 1 already. Like 3, 2, 1, 2021. Roquan Smith. Really? Dude, this is exactly how I wrote it in my notes. I could not stomach it because I initially did not put 2017 on this list with Roquan Smith. I did not have them on this list because, let's be real, it was Roquan Smith and that's about it. But I could not stomach it knowing that I didn't have him anywhere on this list and I didn't have him at number 1. So this is how I wrote it. Roquan Smith by himself at number 1. I think that's a non-negotiable. I know it's ranking the rooms by 3 deep, but he alone counts for 3 bodies.
That's you like Roquan is like one of the first players that you got the Kirby Smart era. They're like, oh, this is what elite defensive players look like.
Whoa!
Now I know that he wasn't recruited by Kirby Smart. He was a junior in 2017, so like not a Kirby Smart recruited guy, but the development he went through from 2015 to 2017 was insane. So I fully respect putting Roquan there. You put Roquan there, and you have to also include Reggie Carter and Nate Patrick. And while they were solid guys, like I don't think they compare to the 2021 group where you had essentially Nakobe Dean, Quay Walker, Channing Tindall running around. There's another guy I'm forgetting there's a fourth guy on there that I'm forgetting. I'm pretty sure.
Oh gosh, you're putting me on the spot here.
But essentially, you had 3 NFL guys running around, like high quality NFL guys, and a Butkus Award winner running around the linebacker position. That's one of the most fun linebacker groups I remember watching as a Georgia fan. So it's my number one.
I mean, you might be thinking of Adam Anderson. Because he was playing there for a stint.
He was there for a while. He was coming off the edge, I think, or as the jack. So, but yeah, I think that to me is one of the best linebacker group Georgia.
I do have that group as my number 2. Nakobe Dean, Quay Walker, and Channing Tindall. Mm-hmm. Phenomenal. I mean, just how much fun it was to watch that group go to work every single Saturday and the abilities that you had with him, because I think you had so much variety with him.
Yeah.
Like Nakobe Dean was by definition a pristine Mike linebacker at the college level. Quay Walker was an avatar walking around on the field. You could do so many different things with him. And then Channing Tindall just ran around with his head on fire. Like he just wanted to go wreck shit up, you know? So I think that between those 3 guys and again, the variety that they provided you with on defense, that to me puts him at number 2. And then CJ Allen, Smile Mondon, and Jalen Walker are number 3 for me.
So you have this year?
I do have this year's class because I feel like I've seen enough of CJ Allen to know that this is one of these dudes that we're going to remember for forever, the rest of eternity. We know what Smile Mondon is. He is a SEC starter. He's going to be an NFL football player. And then Jalen Walker, while you use him in different packages, like that's a great addition to have in there as well.
Yeah, I have the 2023 group as my number 2 for that reason, because you have CJ Allen, you have Smile, but you also still get to keep Pop on your roster. Like, say what you want about Jamon Dumas-Johnson. He was a Butkus Award finalist coming into 2023 season, and he played very good football for you. Played good enough for Georgia football to have him as a starter. Now, obviously, CJ Allen came in after the injury, kind of took his spot away, but you had 3 very solid linebackers, not even to mention Raylan Wilson coming off the edge on that. Mm-hmm. So that's my number 2 room.
I think this is another fun one we'll dive into right now. Defensive line.
This one was hard for me because they're so clearly a number 1. Yeah. I feel like it's very evident that there's a number 2. And then number 3, I had to do some thinking.
Yeah, number 1 is obviously 2021.
Yeah, 3 first-round picks.
4
if you count Trayvon Walker.
Yeah, Trayvon Walker, Devontae Wyatt, Jordan Davis, and Jalen Carter as a 2-deep player that year. Like he wasn't even listed as a starter that season because you had Devontae Wyatt and Jordan Davis. Like it doesn't get any better than that. I mean, that's NFL dudes, just every single spot on that defensive line. 2021 is going to be tough to beat. I'm interested to see who you had number 2, because next up for me, I had the 2019 room. The 2019 room, the way I remember is like you had a young Jordan Davis who was really coming along. I remember it was like him and Trayvon Walker during that season. It was the Auburn game when they were playing Bo Nix, where it was like, okay, Jordan Davis, that guy's going to be a dude. Like he is a force to be reckoned with in the interior of the defensive line. And then Trayvon Walker coming off the edge of that game, it was like, who the heck is this guy? Like that dude looks like it completely different compared to anything else that we've had at that position. And then also on top of that, Malik Herring, just a really good college player. He's floated around the NFL, or not floated around the NFL. He has stayed in the NFL with the Kansas City Chiefs, held a roster spot. That's another NFL guy on that roster. I think that defensive line in 2019 was really good.
So I went with 22 as my team in the
22 is a good
now
one.
Obviously there's Jalen Carter there. I include Nolan Smith in this.
Fair enough.
Even though he's not technically a defensive line player, but he played on the line off the edge so much. I feel like just the swagger of that team, like Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, obviously the ferocious leader, things such as that. And then you have guys like Warren Brinson and Zion Logue coming up and kind of finding their voice in that. So I feel like, and Robert Beal, just a lot of quality talent on there.
Bear Alexander was kind of flashing.
Bear Alexander was also making a name for himself. Came in later in the season and really did well. So I think that was kind of a really quality team or unit that was deep. It doesn't hold a candle to 2021 though.
Yeah, I had 2022 as my third group. Don't have this year's defensive line group on my top 3 because of this reason of it. I mean, it is like It's a question mark this year because it needs improvement. We're expecting improvement because you get Nazir Stackhouse back, who is an NFL player. You're getting Warren Brinson back, who is an NFL player. Tyrone Ingram Dawkins, which we all believe is going to eventually be an NFL football player. Like, it's time to see some increased production from last year. Like last year, it's understandable. Like you went through 2 years of losing a lot of bodies out of that room, whether it was the transfer portal or whether it was because you're losing them to the first round of the NFL draft. This year, though, it's time to see another step up. I think Trey Scott has done a great job of kind of revamping that room, beefing it back up again, and kind of resetting the standard and getting it back to a higher level and getting it back to this, you're not going to run on Georgia, you're not going to do this against us. Like, this is where we're going to win this football game, is at the defensive line. And I think there's a whole lot of potential, and they're going to be good, especially adding Xavier McLeod into the room. It sounds like he's going to get a lot of playing time as well. Georgia has a lot of belief in him. So there's a lot of potential for this room to be really, really good, and maybe they do put themselves into that top 3 range. But again, I mean, from 2019 all the way until 2022, you went on an absurd run at the defensive line.
like a run that is almost impossible to make the standard just because it's so high. Like, it's unfair to think that, oh, we need every defensive line unit to be like the 2021 unit. Like, that's just not feasible to have. That you had 4 or 5 guys just playing next to each other that went in the first round of the NFL draft. Like, I don't think people understand how unheard of it is what Georgia did in 2021. So it's definitely going to be hard to replicate. Yeah. Who do we have next?
I have tight ends, which I think is another obvious answer for the number 1 overall selection, which is Darnell Washington, Brock Bowers, and Oscar Delp.
Yeah, 2022. Like, the 2021 unit was so good because it was a 1-2 punch. And then having Oscar Delp in there, adding him in 2022 made it so much better because, let's be honest, tight ends get injured. I mean, Darnell Washington went down in that Peach Bowl and Oscar Delp stepped up, and you didn't really notice his absence because of it. So I think that's the best tight end room. It's got 3 NFL guys in it and one of the greatest college football tight end of all time. So
yeah, and I think that was another thing, is like, it's not like we're just throwing Oscar Delp's name in there because, like, oh, the former 4-star was also there. So that's also one of the reasons why it's one of the best rooms. Like, we saw Oscar Delp get meaningful game reps in big time moments, and he lived up to the standards. Like, we knew at that moment, okay, Oscar Delp is one of these guys. He is one of these top tier tight ends that Georgia got again. So more than comfortable, of course. But yeah, I think Darnell Washington and Brock Bowers take the cake by themselves, but having Oscar Delp as a 3 deep there, that also puts him in that group. And then also the following year, because again, you have Brock Bowers, like 2022. Yeah. That's another, or 2023. That's right.
I mean, the Bowers Delp combination, obviously Bowers didn't play for a good handful of those games, but anytime you have Brock Bowers on your team, it makes your tight end room a top 5.
Yeah.
Like, he was that good. He was that generational. And I think that his absence is going to be heavily felt next year. Not because Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky aren't adequate players. Not because I don't think that they'll do a good job. But just because when a player of that talent, of that, like, he's a one of a kind, he leaves your program, it's going to be felt.
I mean, it's no different than when Jalen Carter was leaving the roster. It was like, we know without a doubt, you're going to feel some type of loss there this next season because you can't replace Jalen Carter. Like, there's just no possible way that you don't feel the effects of that. So no different than, you're going to feel the effects of Brock Bowers not being there. Yeah,
I think the kind of mood around the 2024 tight end room is going to be similar to the one you felt in the 2023 defensive line room, where it was, well, we still have a solid room, but we're so used to having all of these stars and guys that are elite and like game changers. Like, that's not going to be on your roster every year, and that you're going to feel the outlash of that.
Yeah, I think this year's tight end room is number 3 for me, because we know what Oscar Delp is. You're getting Ben Urosic, who's going to plug in as number 2. While we haven't watched a whole lot of film on him and don't know a whole lot about him, by all accounts, people believe in this guy being an NFL football player. So if you're having Oscar Delp, who's an NFL football player, and you're adding in Ben Urosic, and then also Lawson Lucky, and then whatever Jaden Riddell is, which we've heard about a lot this spring, and a lot of buzz around his name. Like, if a lot of those things continue to grow and continue to form and to continue to develop, it's only going to get better. So I feel very comfortable saying that that's the 3rd best tight end room already.
Yeah, the ceiling is very high for that room. Who do we have left?
We got wide receiver and offensive line, I believe.
Let's do O-line.
You want to do offensive line? This one's also really, really tough.
This one's tough because it's hard to measure production, and it's also hard to remember the amount of guys that are there. Like, you have to remember 7 names when it comes to offensive line. Like, I can't name you the starting 5 that Georgia had in 2019. I will say that my gut reaction is that the 2023 roster was one of the best that Georgia's had.
2019, I want to say you had Andrew Thomas, Isaiah Wilson, Solomon Kinley, Trey Hill, Ben Cleveland. Like, that was your starting five.
Yeah, Trey Hill. Yeah.
And
that's impressive that you can do that.
To me, that's number one in my opinion.
That is a fantastic room.
Which Isaiah Wilson didn't work out in the league, but it wasn't because of lack of talent. I mean, we saw what he did at the college level. I think having those two tackles and then Ben Cleveland on the interior, then Solomon Kinley was also an NFL offensive lineman for quite a little bit as well. Mm-hmm. Trey Hill is what it is. Not the best center that we've had over the years. Cedric Van Pran has that title. But I think that what you had between Ben Cleveland, Isaiah Wilson, and Andrew Thomas alone, I think that's the best offensive line unit collectively.
Yeah, I have 2023 last year just because, like, it felt so deep. Like, obviously, like, you have the best center Georgia's had since David Andrews, which was 10 years ago, and Cedric Van Pran. Then you had Tate Ratledge, who was going to be a day two guy at least. Amarius Mims, obviously, on one end. So, like, just the amount of talent that you had in that room, it stands out.
Yeah, absolutely. 2023 would probably be number two for me. That's a really good one. And then 2022 is probably
2022 with Broderick Jones and Amarius Mims. Now, Amarius Mims wasn't even starting there,
but you had so many really good names along Broderick Jones as well. Like, again, it's just these last few runs that you've had at the offensive line room. Mm-hmm. Again, like any other room, it seems like the amount of talent that you pumped out of there. I think that 2020, and especially because you're coming off of national title runs for a reason, because you have guys like that on your roster. Because you won the offensive line. Yeah, because you had an offensive line like that. So yeah, I would agree with that right there.
Who'd you put for your number three?
I would say I had 2019, 2023, and 2022.
Okay, I had 2023, 2020, and then 2019 is mine.
2020. What did that one look like? Can you remember that one?
I can't remember exactly.
Ben Cleveland was still there.
I remember Ben Cleveland was still there, and then I remember that it was it Trey Hill at the center position? It wasn't Lamont Gilliard.
No, yeah, I think it was Trey Hill still.
It just felt like there were a lot of veteran guys on that unit.
Oh, wait, I can kind of tell you right here. I know when they're drafting. Trey Hill was drafted in 2021, so yes, he was on the 2020 roster.
I mean, that was a roster that essentially was like, hey, you're going to have to protect a quarterback that is figuring shit out right now.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, we're going to really need to rely on running the ball. So I think that's kind of why I went with that.
Yeah, hard to argue with that one. And then last but not least, we have the wide receivers. We saved this room for a special reason, so you're definitely going to stay tuned for that. We have more on the wide receiver room. We're not just going to...
Who's your number three? Sorry to interrupt.
Number three?
Who's your third best wide receiver room that Kirby Smart's had?
Third best wide receiver group. I wrote this in a very weird way. Probably not the most efficient way. I wrote it in paragraph form, which was probably really dumb on my part.
I'll go ahead and give it to you. I had 2023. I had this last year's group.
Okay.
Because you didn't have Lab McConkey for a little bit, and yeah, you were without a guy like A.D. Mitchell, but there were so many solid options, it seemed. Like Dominic Lovett, Ra Thomas, Dylan Bell, like all guys that kind of emerged to make that unit. Like coming into the year, it was like, hey, this might be an elite unit, but coming into the year, there were guys that kind of stepped up and surprised you.
I would agree with that. Can I tell you my top group? And this one kind of surprised myself because I mean, looking back at the rosters, it was like you go back and look at it and you're like, dude, I forget how deep that room truly was and how much talent there was for that specific year. And it's 2021 because you look back on that room. That's my
number two, yeah.
If you look back on it, it's Ladd McConkey, George Pickens, A.D. Mitchell, Jermaine Burton, Kyrus Jackson, Dominic Blaylock is still on the roster as well. There's a whole lot in it now. Of course,
George Pickens.
I said George Pickens. He was hurt that year. So, like, it's a very small sample size of and I think that's why it's easy to forget about how good that room was from top to bottom when they were healthy, because for a large portion of the season, they were not healthy together. They didn't get a whole lot of run as a collective unit, but man, like in that playoff run when they were all there and they all were available, that's a freaking loaded
on paper
room.
On paper, it's very similar to what we said about the 2020, 2019, 2020 DB room. Like on paper, it was elite. It was stacked, but there weren't a lot of times where they all played together. So I agree with you there. 2021 is kind of a forgotten room of how stacked that was.
Yeah, and I think it was because you're also still trying to figure some things out with Stetson. He's kind of figuring out his groove, finding his game, but it was because you had wide receivers like that, I think, that really allowed Stetson to get comfortable and for that offense to continue to flourish throughout the season. And then I would have 2023 as my number two group, and then I'm putting 2024 as number three on my list because I'm still holding out on this group. And I'm going to continue to do it for the rest of the time until they prove me wrong, which I think there's a really good chance that they do, but I'm not buying a whole bunch of stock in it just quite yet.
So I'm going to be a hypocrite here, and I'm going to put 2024 as the number one wide receiver group. But I'm going to do it because I feel like everyone on this list, with the exception of Colby Young, has proven themselves as commodity at the University of Georgia. Like, Anthony Evans has kind of shown, like, hey, this guy could be really special. We know what Dylan Bell is. We know what Raiola Thomas is. We know what Dom Lovett is. We know what Aaron Smith is. We have to assume that those guys are all going to improve this year, and I think that this room as a whole is going to go down as one of the most iconic in Georgia football history, simply because also you're going to be more geared towards throwing the ball to the wide receivers this year. Brock Bowers isn't here. Yeah. Like, there's not a guy that's going to soak up all your receptions. And, oh, by the way, you've shifted to more of a passing unit. Like, Carson Beck threw the ball over 400 times last year. Like, you don't really see that as a Georgia team. So that's why I have Georgia's 2024 roster as a number one team, or number one roster Kirby Smart's had in the wide receiver room.
I'm just hesitant to do it because, like, while Raiola Thomas does have a full season at Georgia, I still want to see more from Raiola Thomas. Like, I want to see more production out of Raiola Thomas. Dominic Lovett was great last year for Georgia. I want to see more of Dominic Lovett. I want to see spring game 2024 Dominic Lovett through the entire regular season. We got to see Dylan Bell in spurts last year. I want to see a full season of production from Dylan Bell. We got to see Anthony Evans in the SEC championship game and in the Orange Bowl. I want to see a full season of Anthony Evans making plays like that. So it's just like, I want to see it happen in 2024. I want to see them all put it together. They have all the pieces to do it. There's no doubt about that. I think it is the top to bottom most talented that they have had. But I feel like we've been saying that for the last 3 years, and we've kind of been led to disappointment a little bit. So I'm just going to continue to hold out on it a little bit.
So is there something that, or a metric that would have to be achieved this year for you to say, okay, this was everything we hoped it to be?
You want to set the bar? We're going to set the bar for the wide receiver. Why not? Setting the bar. I like this. So we're bringing in one of our known national topics into the local hour, setting the bar for the wide receiver room. And this is how I broke it down. I'm putting in these timestamps right quick because people love their timestamps. So I'm doing my part on that. You guys
are finally getting timestamps now that Brooks isn't here.
I'm trying to be more consistent about it for you guys. I know sometimes I miss out on it, so I'm doing that part for you.
Because Brooks tells us not to do it. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. He doesn't say that.
That's funny. So yeah, I think this is how I broke it down and how I'm going to set the bar for the wide receiver room. I think there's 5 names that all of the success from the wide receiver room completely stems off of this year. 5 names, and it's Raiola Thomas, Dylan Bell, Dominic Lovett, Colby Young, and Anthony Evans. If all 5 of those guys meet the expectations that we've kind of already set on them, like if Raiola Thomas does increase his production from last year and he fully figures things out and he is that true X wide receiver that can win over the top and win 50-50 balls, that's a win. If Dylan Bell is this Swiss Army knife weapon that you can plug and play everywhere and Mike Bobo wants to feed him the ball and he can be your workhorse at the wide receiver position, that's a win there. If Dominic Lovett plays like 2024 spring game, Dominic Lovett for 15, 16 games this year,
dangerous.
That's a win for the wide receiver group. And if Colby Young does what he did in the spring game and is this elite specimen that Georgia's been kind of missing at the wide receiver group this year, and Anthony Evans is what he looked to be advertised in 2023, that's setting the bar for me for the wide receiver group.
So, I mean, you just listed off like 5 or 6 guys that are going to be like heavily featured in the Georgia offense.
Should be. That's what we expect.
Now, the number for Georgia, and I talked about this last night, and kind of the final infinity stone for them to get is a 1,000-yard receiver. I don't think there's a 1,000-yard receiver in this unit, and here's why. It's not because there's not someone that's talented enough. It's not because they don't have a guy to do it. It's not because they don't have a quarterback and throw it. God knows Carson Beck is more than talented.
Yeah.
Here's the best case scenario for Carson Beck. If Georgia plays 16 games this year, which is the second highest you can play other than 17 if Georgia plays 16 games this year and Carson Beck has the exact average amount of yards he has per game, he'll throw for 4,800 yards, which is a shit ton. Like, that'll smash any Georgia record. That'll smash Stetson Bennett's record. Now, the math on this. In 2023, Brock Bowers was Georgia's highest receiver. He accounted for 18% of Carson Beck's production. So now, if you're telling me that there's someone on that list this year that's going to match Brock Bowers' production at 18% of Carson Beck's throws, is there anyone there, number one?
It's probably between Dominic Lovett and Dylan Bell, if I had to guess.
Okay, so even if, let's just play devil's advocate and say Dominic Lovett is everything we saw in the spring game. He gets 18% of the production. That is only 18% of 4,800 is only 864 yards. So we're essentially having to say that Raiola Thomas or Dom Lovett or Dylan Bell or one of these guys has to get over 20% of Carson Beck's throws for them to be a 1,000-yard receiver. And I just don't think that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, I broke it down in this way, a very similar way. So, like in 2022, when Stetson Bennett did set the passing yard record and he had 4,000 plus passing yards, 3 players went over 500 yards receiving that season: Brock Bowers, Kenny McIntosh, and Ladd McConkey. Now, it wasn't just like they had 500 yards. It was a whole lot more than that. But the Kenny McIntosh had like over 500. So you got to spread that out against someone other than a running back likely this season is probably going to go to the one of the wide receivers. So at least 3 guys to replicate that, and 2 of them need to be plus 750-yard receivers. Both Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers that season were plus 750-yard receivers that year, and a third riding their coattails. I mean, like right behind them. You need a third name behind them. Like if it is Dylan Bell and Dominic Lovett leading the charge, and they're both of them are 750-plus yard receivers, like Colby Young or like Robert Thomas got to be riding their coattails of like they tallied on like 670-plus receiving yards this season as well.
Yeah, it's going to be a wide receiver group by committee. Like you're going to have 5 or 6 guys anytime, any game you roll out there and be like, these guys can go, we're going to be fine. And the problem with that is you're going to see it hinders the production. It's why Georgia hasn't had a 1,000-yard receiver since 2019. Because they've gone essentially 3 deep at the running back position ever since. Like, obviously, when you have more guys getting touches, when you have more guys kicking the rocks, you're not going to have as many opportunities for yards. Like, you're telling me that Dylan Bell, Robert Thomas, Dom Lovett, Colby Young, and I mean, even guys like Arian Smith and Oscar Delp, Lawson Lucky, Michael Jackson, Trevor Etienne, those guys are going to get catches too. Like, it's not going to be a 3-man show. And I don't think Carson Beck also is going to have some Joe Burrow like season where he blows like, what was it, 5,000 yards?
Probably. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but that sounds about right.
So, I mean, it's just because Georgia's so balanced of a football team, and Carson Beck distributes the ball so evenly. And I know that the Mike Bobo mantra is like he has this one guy that he kind of works into his system more than others. I don't think there is a one guy this year that you have, because Dylan Bell, Rara Thomas, Dom Lovett, I think there might be spurts where like, hey, today's the Dylan Bell game. We saw that it's last year. Like Tennessee Dylan Bell was way different than the South Carolina Dylan Bell we saw. Like, hey, maybe today Colby Young's our guy. Maybe today Dom Lovett's the matchup nightmare we need to exploit. Like, I don't think there's one guy on the roster anymore that Mike Bobo is going to come out and say, okay, we got to make sure we get him touches because he's that much of a game changer, because there's so many game changers on this roster. That's why I have him listed as the number 1 group for wide receivers, but it's also why I don't think there's a 1,000-yard receiver here.
That's a very valid point. I think you broke that down very nicely. And I think the biggest thing that you want out of this wide receiver group is just explosivity, and it be consistent. Like, get big time plays out of them consistently. Like, nobody cares who it is. Nobody cares what name is attached to the catch at the end of the play or anything like that. But I would also go to your point as well and say, like, there was a reason why within the first 3 weeks of Carson Beck being the starter last year, like his first 3 games as a college football player and a quarterback as a starter, that he was breaking the record for most receivers thrown to and most completions to different receivers in a game at Georgia, because he spreads the ball around the field. It very much reminds me of the way that Matt Ryan played in 2016 with the Atlanta Falcons, where every single game it ended with Matt Ryan completed a pass to 11 different receivers today. Now, you had your Julio Jones and you had your Taylor Gabriel and you had all these guys that could do special things,
Sanu and
Muhammad, like those types of things. And those guys got more completions than others, but it was also like there's so many different guys, and this quarterback spreads the football around the football field, and it's just not going to be like this stat overload to this one guy. Now, again, Julio Jones probably not the best example of that because you're going to force feed him, but Georgia doesn't have to, and that's the biggest point.
Exactly, and I think that's a benefit. Like, people are going to get to the end of the 2024 season and go, well, we went another year without a 1,000-yard receiver. Everyone hyped up this receiver room. No, like, the receiver room is too good to have a 1,000-yard receiver. Like, Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase are like the one exception to this room where it was like you had 2 guys that were so damn elite that it didn't really matter. They were going to get theirs first. Like, I don't know if there's a Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase on this, and that's fine because you have 5 extremely, extremely talented players.
Yeah, absolutely agree. All right, let's get into this last segment. You wanted to talk some more about the NFL draft because some more dogs were linked to the first round, and more than I think we thought, right?
Yeah, so we linked Carson Beck to the first. There was a mock draft I was looking at yesterday where Carson Beck was the first overall selection by the New York Giants. There's a new mock draft out by The Athletic for 2025 that has Mykel Williams going as the number 1 pick to the Panthers. Now, who do you think was the number 2 pick?
Shadeur, I don't know.
No, it's Carson Beck. So
1 and 2.
According to this article by The Athletic, Georgia will have the number 1 overall pick and the number 2 overall pick and the first quarterback off the board in Carson Beck.
Has that ever happened?
I don't know.
Ever happened where a college had back-to-back players at 1 and 2?
I have no clue.
I'm gonna look that up and see if I can find it, because it's got to be maybe once in a lifetime.
But it gets better, because you go down the list again, and then you have Malachi Starks taken by Indianapolis at 12. And then this mock draft has Ernest Green coming out and being 16th. So Georgia has 4 players in the top 16th in this mock draft next year, which I mean is absolutely insane if you think about, because their record last in 2021, that unit was 5. So they're going to get 4 out of the 5 before the first half of the draft is even over, according to this mock draft, obviously. Now, it's a mock draft. We have yet to play a single game in the 2024 season, but it is interesting to note that, hey, there's professionals, there's analysts, there's guys that have all their eyes on these guys and are projecting them to be high picks. And I said it yesterday, and I'll make it again. I'll make this declaration again. Georgia is going to smash the 15 players drafted record in 2025.
All right, Jim Harbaugh, I hear you.
I'll be Jim Harbaugh for Kirby Smart, because there's so much talent in this roster, and there's so many guys that stuck around for another season or came in, have one, like Trevor Etienne's another guy. Like, there are so many guys on this roster that are draft eligible that are going to be playable players. Like, they're going to be players that are able to be drafted in the NFL, and they're also going to test well at the combine. So Georgia's going to smash their 2021 record of NFL draft picks selected.
All right. April 30th, 2024 at 9:52 p.m., Christian Kirby called his shot. Georgia's going to smash their own NFL draft record. You heard it here first. Mark it down on your calendar. You remember this moment. Record it, whatever you got to do. We're going to call back to this one here in about 365 days. But I did the research right quick. There have been 3 different colleges to have the first 2 picks in the NFL draft. None of those have been recent. It was Michigan State in 1967, Nebraska in 1984, Penn State in 2000.
Who are the 2 Penn State guys?
Penn State, it was Courtney Brown and LeVar Arrington.
LeVar Arrington, wow, shout out. But no, I think that, I mean, there's a world where there's like 17 or 18 guys drafted.
Yeah, Brooks did a tremendous job breaking it down off the top of his head.
I can't do that right now.
5 minutes, I couldn't either. But I mean, when you break it down and you think, and that was with us saying like, that guy's going to come back. Like, we're just going to say he doesn't go to the NFL draft and he's going to come back. There was like 3 or 4 names that we did that with. So you're thinking of like, potentially at maximum maybe 20 total players being draft eligible for Georgia next year, and probably like 18 of them, maybe even all 20 of them, having potential draft grades between rounds 1 and 7. It's ridiculous to think about, I know, but I mean, it is certainly a possibility. It's not like you're sitting here making this hot take of like, oh, I'm calling my shot. It may be a shot in the dark. Like, I don't think it's as shot in the dark as you think it is, or as some people may think it is. Like when Michigan did it, it was exactly how I kind of thought it would be. Like, you went into round 7 and you had 4 more players drafted, which got you to 13. Like, it's not like Georgia here where it could be like, you have 4 players go within the top 15.
Yeah, I mean, you could see 5, maybe 6 guys if you really like have a good year go in the first round. Like, you could break the first round record. So I think the other question is, what does Michael Williams have to do to actually become the number 1 overall pick?
Yeah, I mean, he's basically competing with James Pierce as an edge, and everybody loves James Pierce from Tennessee. They're jumping on, and rightfully so. I mean, that highlight tape is absolutely insane.
Scary.
James Pierce is a phenomenal football player, so he is deservingly so getting his credit and is being placed in these mock drafts where he should be, but everybody looks at production, especially in these mock drafts. Now, I think the NFL teams we've come to learn, like with Travon Walker being number 1 overall a few years ago, didn't have the production, but he had the measurables, he had the ceiling and everything.
That was strictly based on traits. And I mean, he didn't take over as the number 1 overall pick until after the combine. People were like, wait a minute, this guy's a freak of nature. And they measured him out and they saw his speed and everything like that. And that was probably the pushback as to why he was selected. It was like, wait a minute, this guy had what, 4 sacks in 2021? Why are we picking him?
Yeah, like 4.5 sacks.
I think Michael Williams, if he has 8 or 9 sacks...
lock him in, top 10 pick.
Yeah, the realistically, like Michael Williams doesn't need to have a double-digit sack season here because he is going to measure so well, and the fact that obviously he has the G on the side of his helmet is going to help him even more because there's kind of a prestige and echelon that comes with being a Georgia player now in the NFL draft. So
I mean, you just look at it as, you mean to tell me that Michael Williams, from a true freshman to now a junior, started all 3 years at the University of Georgia, and while the production may have not been up there, like he was consistently one of the best players on the football field at all times? Yeah, I think we're going to take a shot on that player within the top 20 of the first round, you know? Like, it's not that hard to really break it down, especially knowing like how things have worked out for Georgia, the defensive line. Now that we've been able to see some multiple years of NFL production from some of their first round picks, a lot of them are working out. A lot of them are doing really, really well with their NFL landing spots. So I think teams will have no issue and really won't hesitate whatsoever to take a shot on Michael Williams.
Yeah, and it's also going to be like luck of the draw. Like if there's a team at number 1 that needs a quarterback. Obviously, Michael Williams isn't going number 1. But like if Carolina, and supposedly they have Bryce Young as their guy, like it's all luck of the draw. But it is very interesting to think about how Georgia has the potential to have a number 1 selection in the NFL draft, and he could be an offensive or a defensive player. So that's exciting to think about.
Man. Could be crazy next NFL draft season, huh? 1 and 2 overall. That'd be absolutely absurd.
I mean, 4 guys in the top 16.
Yeah,
like 25% of the first 16 picks will be taken up by Georgia players alone, supposedly.
Says one source.
Yeah, I mean says the Athletic.
We'll get many more coming in over the years, I'm sure. So
yeah, and again, obviously, like this is all maybe a year away, kind of way too early mock stuff, but.
It's made for what exactly we're doing right now of like, this could happen. We're putting you on notice right now. We're talking about the potential of it. It's
one of those things that we put on notice so if it does happen, we can come back to him and like, see, we told you. But if it doesn't, it's like, it was a year ago. No one's going to remember that. That's kind of the way this job works, I've learned.
I'm good. You good?
Yeah, I mean, we were going to do a player of the day, but I don't think there's enough time.
We'll save it for Brooks. We'll see if he can go 2 for 3. How about that? So Thursday, if Brooks is here, which I think he will be, we're going to show him another player of the day that Christian found.
Do we know where he's going on Thursday? So we can.
I do not. I don't have a schedule in front of me, but boys stay busy. It's hard to keep
Brooks,
up with
if you're
schedule.
watching this, tweet out where you're going on Thursday so we know and can.
But we appreciate you guys for being here. Y'all have a great rest of your evening. We will see you on Thursday.
Yeah,
appreciate you.
Appreciate y'all watching and staying in with us. I know the numbers were kind of hovering pretty well. So
we got
a loyal fan base. I appreciate it, y'all.
To the Brodies. We love it.